Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Isolina Boto. I am the coordinator of these briefings. I'm the manager of CTA office in Brussels. And since 2007 now, where the briefings were launched, I'm the coordinator on behalf of the European Commission, CTA, the ACP Secretariat and group of ambassadors, Concord, with a platform of development NGOs across member states, which Secretariat is in Brussels, as well as today, very pleased again to welcome as co-organizers my colleagues from BMZ and GIZ. We thank you very much for being with us today. We thank very much as well the people who are great numbers following us live online. And as always, feel free to pose your questions to the speakers or bring some of the input through the online platform. And also the discussions are recorded, so you can find them in our website afterwards, edited actually by a speaker. We are very pleased to talk today about a topic very topical, very interesting. It seems very technical, and it is very technical and very complex. But when you look at it, it's also very interesting. It's very wide. You will find a very nice, actually, graphic from our colleagues from GIZ who have mapped all the applications, all the areas of interest of blockchain. Extremely interesting, which goes from health, education, of course, identity, humanitarian aid, and so on. All important, in fine, for our sector. But unfortunately, we cannot already. The agriculture part is very wide. So we only will concentrate today on the supply chain and the related issues, on traceability, and of course on finance, which is very vital, and a bit on, of course, the governance and the legal issues. Even that, it will just be, of course, a broad overview. We would like to look at the challenges and opportunities that this technology brings. Of course, we are very pleased to have some of the very big companies like Cargill and IBM working already on those applications. We would be, of course, from CT and from the organizers very interested in seeing what is the interest, what is the potential that can be applicable and lessons learned to the ACP countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, the islands from Caribbean and the Pacific, and what could be brought to scale or launch in that context. We look at some specific cases as well from Africa, so we are very pleased that colleagues could come. We have cases starting by CT and our partners also in the Caribbean and the Pacific that you will find in some of our presentations as well as in the material we have in your brochures. We have done, as always, a reader. We welcome any kind of input you can bring on your companies, on the cases you know that they are not featured, because we will have, of course, an updated version afterwards. As in any of the topics we have done so far, this one being the number 55, we will be very pleased to see also how we could develop new partnerships around this technology, and of course with the focus on application to agriculture and rural development. So without more delay, because Secretary General of the ACP Group, Ambassador Gomes, Patrick Gomes, who welcome us in this house. People love it, actually. From the evaluations we get back, they love to be here. We are always very well welcome. It's like being at home. So thank you very much. I know you have a very, very busy schedule. So for you, you have to leave us to go to other meetings. So we are already very pleased that you could join us. Ambassador Gomes is the Secretary General since 2015 of this house, of the group of Africa, Caribbean and Pacific states. I had the pleasure to meet him in his previous capacity, who was ambassador of Guyana to the EU, but he has had many roles working for a Guyana government as ambassador and high level at the WTO, FAO, in many of the UN organizations, especially for the Latin America and the Caribbean, and involved in many of the research. Ambassador Gomes, each time I speak to our partners, or a big part of our partners in the Caribbean, they also remember you, and that's not in your biodata, as professor. Each time I meet somebody, they say, oh, Ambassador Gomes was my professor. And I think an excellent one, because they still keep speaking about you. Thank you very much for co-organizing these briefings, 55 today, because it has been a really a very, very interesting partnership. Ambassador?
Thank you very much, Isolina. Good morning and welcome to all. Excellency, Ambassador Mwende, Chair of our Committee of Ambassadors, distinguished guests, family, friends, do see the ACP House, as we like to say, as your house. We welcome very much. But on behalf of the ACP Group of States, we want to place on record how much we admire and appreciate this initiative that Isolina and along with the Directorate of the CTA have been able to accomplish in these Brussels rural briefings. It is, in fact, a flagship, and we're very proud of it, and we want to see it really anchored and institutionalized and move forward. I say good morning and also encouraging you to let this not be the beginning, but in fact a continuation of our engagement together. We want to build on the success that has come so far from the CTA and the work in this area of information dissemination, but also to engage in where we are trying to introduce the new technologies. The briefings really allow an information exchange, and they allow what we also refer to very much as South-South and triangular cooperation in the ACP Group of States. I admire very much that the ACP continues to be a facilitator. That's why we are able to utilize our convening authority, but also a catalyst. We must be a catalyst for change, change that in fact is meaningful. And in this event that we look at opportunities for blockchain, it must mean meaningful for the producers, but also right across the entire spectrum of the chain, a chain of services. So we admire very much an innovation that has to become organic and linked to what we do, to see the farming system and to see the entire system as a holistic way in which there is benefits that are shared from the producers right across the services of the chain. Now, I realized that early on I was speaking to Wim from the European Commission, that working in the forestry area in Guyana, we introduced early on, not as advanced as blockchain, a concern about traceability. Traceability on two sides, to look at what was happening in terms of the depletion of species of the forest that had to be protected. And wherever you had cut and felled those forests, and wherever you attempted to export them, both in terms of the shipping and where they arrived, the FAO had collaborated with the ACP in tracing the culprits, but also praising those who were, in fact, observing the management of the forest resources. So now this has been expanded. In addition to traceability, I think I can see that there's great scope that we will be looking at questions of food contamination. What is happening across the chain in terms of how health and food security must have a dimension that, in fact, we avoid losses, but also we ensure that food that reaches our consumers are, in fact, healthy food, but also they are also removing the amount of pesticides, etc. Contaminated foods, therefore, is an area in which can be so readily traced and observed by this methodology and the use of the technology. We are also concerned that there is a commercial side, where Cargill is here and the big farmers are here, but also the question of timing of payments, the question of monitoring how the contract that has been engaged with our farmers are able to see that payments are made on a timely basis, but also to know what is arising that gives rise to the problem of the farmers, the producers themselves, not receiving their due payments. So I think that aspect of the commercialization that comes along with the blockchain is very significant from what I've been able to see. We also, of course, realize that there's a very significant part in terms of transport. I know when we worked in the banana situation in the islands, and we worked on bananas and sugar, transporting sugar from places like far away in Give Me a Bit in Jamaica to bring it to the factory in Frome or where it was to move, the transportation and the blockage of the transportation system. Now you can monitor that and see what is happening so you can reduce that. So aspects that see the system, the systemic whole of farming systems is what we really come to grips with, and the technology helps us therefore. Our concern will also have to be, as ACP, about the policy. The policy in terms of how we put strict rules, and as Isolina had mentioned, the governance. The new technology cannot be on its own as a runaway, or just in fact for the sake of the benefit of some. Therefore, the governance must be able to reflect the equitable use of the technology, and therefore the security, the strict rules, the rule making that must come into this is very important. It's a broad spectrum, but it's a very, in fact, very significant, very important. It is very challenging, but of course, it is one that we have to address and come to grips with. And we do welcome the fact that this initiative is taken here today and that everyone will participate and give us an opportunity to earn some additional success on which we will build to make a more significant contribution to transforming our agriculture and our benefits to go to the farmers and consumers. I thank you very much and wish you very successful deliberations during the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for these inspiring thoughts, and again for welcoming us. Without delay, I would like to introduce V. Moltov, who is the Deputy Head of the Unit Rural Development, Food Security and Nutrition at EuropeAid. I am very happy to welcome Wim Moltov. For one reason is that we started together the briefings in 2007, we designed them together, and we implement them together for a few years until he decided to leave Brussels, to leave us, but we are very happy that he's back. His areas have been very strongly food security, nutrition, agriculture development, so all what matters today, which includes, of course, technology. He then left for Rome to work at the EU delegation there with FAO, IFAD, WFP and our UN partners and colleagues, together also with some field work in delegations in Sierra Leone, Ethiopia and Ghana. We are very pleased he's back now in the actually unit that works very closely with CTA. And being Dutch, he had also in Holland a background on research and a teaching part, so it makes it very comprehensive. Thank you very much, Wim, for being here again. I'm very pleased that you made number 1 and you make now number 55.
Thank you very much, Isolina, and Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Secretary General, and ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here at number 55. And Isolina, who would have thought all those years ago that we would have a briefing on blockchain? It's a topic that is so new, in certain ways revolutionary, but with all kind of revolutionary technologies, it's also something whereby one has to think what are the consequences, what are the opportunities, but also what are the challenges. And Patrick made quite a relevant reference to the need to explore the governance dimension. At the EU level, we are also, of course, looking at blockchain. Much of that happens within the EU context and in the context of the digital single market. Much more than when we talk about our international cooperation, but I'll come back to that. In the framework of the EU digital single market, there are initiatives, for example, like the European blockchain partnership, a partnership of the 26 actually of the EU member states, not all of them, with some others, cooperating on the European blockchain services infrastructure. The infrastructure that should support the delivery of cross-border digital public services. And again, when we're talking about European, we're talking about standards. We're also talking about standards on security. We're talking about standards on privacy. The Commission also took the initiative of setting up the EU Blockchain Observatory. And forum, which is mapping initiatives on blockchains, but also is sharing knowledge about blockchains, and has facilitated the foundation of the so-called International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications. So lots of initiatives happening at the European level. And as I said, in the international level, we're also looking at it, but it trails a little bit behind. Nevertheless, since 2017, we do have also a digital for development strategy at the European Commission, aiming to increase digitalizations in all our sectors of cooperation, including very prominently in agriculture, agribusinesses. I would like to mention here as well the setup last year of the task force on Africa EU Digital Economy Task Force. This is a task force set up in the framework of the new EU-Africa Alliance for Sustainable Investment and Jobs, an alliance that was launched in September last year. One of the best known elements of that alliance is the Task Force Rural Africa, which came up with its report earlier this year and set out a number of directions for enhanced EU-Africa cooperation, including also on technology and digital sides. So this digital economy task force will also come up with a report in the course of this year. It is a task force like all the others set up by the two commissions, involving representatives from the various corners, like private sector, the research community, financial sector, etc. So let me mainly conclude by saying that we are looking very much forward to learning here. This is new. We'll have to see, to explore, to learn from those who have already gained experience in whatever sector there is, and we look forward to see how we can not only explore but also apply these kind of technologies in our cooperation for the benefit of farmers, of their efficiency, of their income, and of their livelihoods. So with those words, I look forward with you to a very successful 55th briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wim. I give the floor now to our co-organizer partners today, BMZ and implementing agency GIZ. We have the pleasure coming from Bonn to have Mr. Andreas Pletziger, who is the Senior Policy Officer at the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, who works at the Unit of International Agriculture Policy, Agriculture and Innovation, who has a lot of experience on project development, on academia as well, and working at different levels, but always on agriculture, innovation and technology. I have to say that we work very well and very closely with BMZ and GIZ. We have co-organized in a number of areas, private-public partnerships, rural-urban, agriculture. Some of the colleagues who had worked here are here today. I've been interacting daily with your colleagues from BMZ and GIZ, and of course with your office in Brussels, and it has always been very efficient. So I thank you very much for co-organizing and co-funding this briefing today with us. Mr. Pletziger.
Thank you very much, Isolina. Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and honor for me to speak to you here today in the ACP Secretariat in Brussels at the 55th Brussels briefing. I will be looking at the opportunities that blockchain technology offers in the agricultural sector. On behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, I would like to thank CTA for all the work that has gone into preparing this event. We are grateful to have had the chance to co-organize this briefing with the European Commission, Concord, and of course CTA. Our special thanks go to the ACP ambassadors and the ACP Secretariat for hosting the event here today. The excellent cooperation we enjoy both with you, with the European Commission, and it is very important for us, as is our collaboration with many of our partner countries, especially in the field of rural development. Sustainable agricultural supply chains are an important issue for us at the BMZ. Digitalization in general and the use of information and communication technology like blockchain is playing an increasingly important role here. Let me tell you a story. 10 to 20 years from now, consumers in supermarkets will be able to see exactly where in the world the coffee or bananas or any other agricultural commodity in their shopping basket was grown. They will be able to see in detail if the product comes from a sustainable growing region and whether chemical fertilizers or pesticides were used. Furthermore, they will know which farmers sowed, cultivated and harvested the crops, and whether they received a fair price for their produce. Consumers will be able to easily track its path from the field to the supermarket. how it has been processed, and what the extent of its carbon footprint is. If consumers are happy, they will buy the product. Alternatively, they will elect to buy a different one. This will be our future if we want it today. BMZ has a long-term commitment in our partner countries in Africa. One of the main challenges for the continent in the next decades is to create enough jobs. So one of our objectives is to help make the agricultural sector more attractive, especially for young people. It must guarantee workers a living wage. It must allow farmers and laborers to live in dignity. If we can do this, we will lay the foundations for long-term prosperity, stability, and peace. And over and above that, it will allow us to feed the world's increasing population. Digital technologies and applications will help us achieve our common sustainable development goals. They provide an opportunity to connect rural population with global markets, innovations, services, expertise, and education. Nonetheless, digitalization should never be seen as an end in itself. We are rigorously testing technologies to determine whether digital technology can help us achieve our goals more swiftly and efficiently. We are guided by the concept of using digital technologies to make development policy measure faster, more effective, and more sustainable. Does it always have to be blockchain? No, of course not. Only a short time ago, blockchain was praised by many as a potential savior that promised to resolve all problems and challenges in global supply chains. The enthusiasm has waned somewhat more recently. The technology is not yet fully mature. Alongside the various technical blockchain designs, a number of legal, social, and economic criteria need to be taken into account before the technology can be used in development cooperation. But blockchain technology does have significant potential, both in terms of enhancing security to counter corruption and in terms of efficiency, enabling cheaper and faster transnational payments, for instance. On behalf of the BMZ, our colleagues from GIZ are working on a series of projects involving the use of blockchain. In 2018, the Blockchain Lab was established in order to develop governance and operating models for blockchain applications in development cooperation. The lab focuses on an area such as sustainable change, insurance, energy, and environmental auditing. Currently, we are elaborating project approaches in selected African countries in which blockchain technology is used to ensure traceability and transparency in sustainable agricultural supply chains. We aim to help value creation in producer countries and to forge contracts between producer organizations and international markets, while securing smallholders, land titles, and halting deforestation. To be successful, digital approaches in development cooperation need to be holistic. Approaches that are limited to the agricultural sector and excludes other areas, or approaches that fail to take account of private sector will be successful in the end, will be less successful in the end. If we are to succeed in the long term, we all need to pull together to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. On this note, I look forward to the rest of our program today with the lectures, presentations from the standpoint of the development cooperation, politics, the private sector, and the civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pletziger, and thank you for reminding us that we will learn today from experts, but it's not a panacea. It has potential, but we have also to put some words of caution around it. Without more delay and closing this part of introductory remarks, which is interesting because it's already starting on the content, I give the floor to the Director of CTA, Michael Aylou. CTA is based, the headquarters are based in Holland, in Wageningen, so thank you for coming along with colleagues. We have a small office here in Brussels. We are an ACP-EU institution. Mr. Ailu, before joining CTA as a director in 2010, had a previous experiences in the CGIAR system, in C4 in Indonesia, ECRAF in Kenya, as well as other involvement at international and regional level. He will tell you more about the perspective of CTA in this topic, which is one of our key ones as well within the digitalization part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isolina. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure for us to have the chair of the ACP Committee of Ambassadors, Ambassador Mwende, the Secretary General, Dr. Gomes, and from the Commission, Wim Olthoff. We're also very pleased to have our partnership with BMZ, GIZ, and we're very pleased to welcome Mr. Andreas Pletziger. We have done some joint briefings before, so we really appreciate your continued partnership with us. Well, we have already heard a lot about the benefits and the potential of blockchain. Of course, the perspective that CTA takes is digitalization can be a game changer in the transformation of African agriculture. It's not a panacea, we know, but it also it offers opportunities across the entire value chain in terms of helping to increase productivity, profitability, and resilience of smallholder agriculture, as well as it will open up opportunities for women and youth. I mean, we have heard from Mr. Pletziger how they see, the potential of digitalization to open up opportunities for youth, and that's a major program that CTA has in terms of capacity building, providing opportunities for young people to benefit from the digital revolution. So we have a lot of projects around the whole digital agenda. We have been engaged in this area for many, many years. So I'm very happy that lately there is a lot of interest and mainstream engagement in this whole idea of digitalization for smallholder agriculture. This year alone, we have had a major event led by the government of Germany at the Global Forum for Agriculture, GFFA, where the major focus was on digitalization for agriculture. And that meeting came up with a ministerial communique working for, calling for mobilizing private sector, public sector engagement and moving forward, mainstreaming this agenda to speed up agricultural transformation. And communicate call for FAO and CT and other organizations to try and push this forward. And we're having a meeting in June to see how this whole effort comes together. CTA is also finalizing a major report on digitalization in agriculture, especially in Africa in this case, in cooperation with the Dalberg advisors. And it's a major study really looking at what's the status of digital innovations across the value chain, across the different ecosystems at present. What are the potential of this technology? What are the challenges and opportunities, and what are the different measures that different stakeholders have to take to make sure that we make advances in this area. There is, as you know, a major event every year, African Green Revolution Forum, that will take place in Ghana in September. And again, the main theme of this conference is digitalization, and CTA being one of the partners will be featuring this report and organizing a number of sessions around these discussions. So hopefully from all these efforts that we will be able to engage governments, the private sector, and so on to mobilize resources, increase investments, and bring about real benefit for smallholder producers. I think the key for us, for CTA, is how can farmers, smallholder farmers, benefit from this technology. So that's really our key focus, and how can we create opportunities for young people, for women, and for rural dwellers to benefit from the technology so that they can improve their incomes and their livelihoods and so on. In this area of blockchain, of course, CT has been doing quite a lot of work. One of the things that we do really is to try and identify some of these emerging technologies, to try and pilot them, test them, and see their relevance, as I said, for smallholder producers. So we do that with different kinds of digital innovations that come into the market. For example, drones. We have been working on drone technology, how they can benefit smallholder farmers, how they can, if young people run them as a business and so on. So we are working already in 19 ACP countries, helping with the regulations, helping with acquisition of the software, hardware, capacity building and so on. So we have been doing similar thing around the blockchain issue since 2017. We have set up a project to help identify, what are the successful cases in blockchain applications in smallholder agriculture, sharing knowledge, creating this platform, working with Wageningen University to test, to look at the different use cases, to document those use cases and, be able to share. We organize training courses and workshops, to share some of this experience. Last year, we also launched a call for proposals to identify opportunities for developing blockchain applications for smallholder agriculture. So we had like 60 proposals coming in, but we were able only to select 4 projects that we could support, that came up with very strong cases. Some of them looking at specific value chains, for example, around cocoa, vegetable value chains, and looking at also some projects on risk mitigation. So we are working in different parts of the ACP, to try and develop these projects and share the lessons and upscale that experience. So we'll hear a bit more about CTS projects from my colleague Chris Addison, who is leading some of the work that we do in this area. So with those words, I look forward to an exciting discussion, and thank you very much for joining us in fairly large number this morning. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much to you, and again to colleagues from the value chain, from the digitalization, from the communication part. In addition, of course, to Chris, who, by the way, was also in the #1 briefing, but in his capacity as a former director of One World Europe. So thank you that you can make it as well 55. It's an achievement. Without a major delay, and of course, thank you to the team in Brussels, which I tend to forget because we are all, it's part of our work, but thank you very much. So our chair for the first panel is Ambassador Mwende. Is the current chair of the ACP group of ambassadors, and is also is ambassador of Namibia to the EU, but of course to Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. So to tell you that the chairs and ambassadors we have today are interested at the policy level to make sure that this benefits the ACP group at the policy and the field part, including the farmers. You will see that they also have a background which will, help to understand this area. Ambassador Mwende was previously the Namibia permanent representative to the UN in New York, but he has also served as executive secretary of the SADC. He has served in Namibian Parliament, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Minister of Agriculture, Water and Rural Development, as well as an impressive research and professor in University of Lund in Sweden, as well in Denmark and in various organizations in South Africa. So thank you very much, because we need all of this, to bring together the different dimensions of this topic. I'm sure that the speakers we have, which are many today, but it's important we reflect all the views and we try to see what is best for us, will help you to keep with the time. And thank you very much again to you and the ambassadors who are in the room. I see Ambassador of Kenya in front of me, as well, of course, as our chair of panel 2, Ambassador of Jamaica, and many others who can be here. Thank you very much for joining us as well. Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to chair this session, but also to learn about this new and revolutionary technology. I've always been intrigued by the application of science and technology to industry. Being a student of economic history and in particular industrialization and where particularly Germany was known for deliberate efforts of applying science and technology to industry. And therefore, whenever there are new innovations in technology, then one is always keen to see how those can be applied. But before I give the floor to the four speakers who are going to unpack this topic for us, let me just thank CTA for the opportunity, but also for the good work you have been doing over the years in sharing new innovations with us here and also with our farmers. And in fact, your role as a catalyst for development and transformation of our agriculture is significant, and I hope that you get the necessary resources to continue to do this and expand to all ACP countries. For a number of ACP countries, agriculture is a very important sector. Maybe not in terms of its contribution to the economy, but particularly contribution to employment. A lot of people, I can say 60% or even more in some countries, depend directly or indirectly on agriculture. Therefore, the blockchain technology in support of the agro-food sector is important. It will have impact not only in terms of production, but also ultimately on the life of the majority of the people of our countries. Now, when I look at this topic and some of the papers, I found it very interesting. The question of traceability, for example. We export beef to the EU, and what makes our beef unique is because it's naturally grown. My colleague Theo de Acher here from South Africa, he knows about what we call the Karoo lamb. It's a mutton, but very soft because of the vegetation in that particular area. And you can't compare it to anything else. And a lot of people may want to sell their lamb as Karoo lamb, but it cannot be. Hence, the question of traceability is important. And we can go on and give those examples. What does it mean? It means that we will become more competitive in global market if our unique products that have an edge over the others because of our natural environment can enter this market on a competitive basis. And that, of course, will have implication on pricing and so forth. So I'm not really supposed to make any statement, but to introduce the speakers, even though I can't just hide my excitement about the topic and what it could mean for developing countries, ACP countries, and as ambassador of Namibia, and for Namibia and Southern Africa. I think the applications are so enormous. And I hope that we are going to continue this dialogue with the CTA, with the support from the EU Commission and others to see how we can really take advantage of this new technology so that we can leapfrog. I think it's an opportunity, and we should take full advantage of that. Now, our first speaker this morning is Michel Tripoli. He's an economist in the Trade and Markets Division of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Prior to joining the Trade and Markets Division, he worked in FAO Regional Office for Europe and Central Asia in Hungary, and as an economist in the United Nations World Food Program. His areas of interest include trade and investment in agriculture, innovation and technology in agriculture, international trade policy, trade facilitation, export promotion, and value chain development. His academic background is in development economics and environmental studies, and he holds both master's and bachelor's degrees from Clark University in Massachusetts, US. Mr. Clark, you have the floor. Oh, it's over here.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished delegates, and participants, thank you for this opportunity to be here. So I'll dive right in. This is where we start. And so blockchain and smart contracts, I'd say, are a means to an end. And so with the prevalence of complex global supply chains and what I would say rather inefficient trade processes, these technologies are a means to solve problems in agricultural supply chains and for trade that are related to traceability, transparency, and efficiency. So in this context, in FAO, Joseph Schmidhuber and myself, we set out to conduct some research and try to answer these and try to better understand how blockchain can address these underlying problems in the agricultural sector. And so today I'll be presenting some of this research and providing a conceptual overview of these emerging opportunities and challenges in the agri-food industry. So very briefly, just to guide the presentation, I'll be looking at what are these underlying problems, the features and applications, and the way forward. And so first off, why is blockchain relevant for food and agriculture? The problem with supply chains is that we don't know what happens when and where. Take, for example, your dinner last night. I had a steak. And think about that process from calf to cow to steak. We don't know where our food products are from, how they were produced, who produced them, and if they're even authentic. Dilution in supply chains from food fraud has significant financial implications and consequences. Secondly, trade is complex, time-consuming, and expensive. To illustrate this point, one cross-border trade transaction includes 20 different entities, approximately, 100 pages of documentation, and 5,000 data field interactions, typically resulting in payment terms of 2 to 4 weeks, which you can imagine what types of implication that has on any business, never mind if you're a small-scale producer. And so these problems are related to data sharing and inefficient means of sharing data. So how can blockchain address these underlying problems related to data sharing? Well, blockchain is a database that is replicated in a network and uses consensus to decide what is true and what is not. As a result, the shared ledger provides immutable and traceable data entries. It can reduce the number of intermediaries, provide even or close to real-time transactions, bringing greater efficiency, traceability, transparency, and even accountability and trust. And so in other words, in short, it provides a secure platform to share data and helps us answer this question of what happens when and where in supply chains. And so there's a number of applications. This is certainly not an exhaustive list. It's just a brief overview. As you can see from the page, these are some that we looked at. But I think instead of focusing on the specific applications, I'll be looking at the main features of the technology in the presentation. So the first main feature is enhanced traceability, as we've heard in the opening statements, and higher quality transactions. Blockchain can be used to record, track, monitor, transact digital and physical assets in supply chains, integrating and managing each step along the way, along the chain. This means each recorded transaction, as it moves between supply chain actors, carries transaction details and product attributes, which can be added by supply chain actors themselves or Internet of Things sensors on data such as agricultural and livestock inputs and practices to transportation and storage conditions, potentially sustainability information, and certifications, export certifications, and other technical details. Now, it's important to note that data is only as accurate as it's entered into and recorded into the the distributed ledger. Blockchain secures the data after it's entered, but it cannot ensure the quality of the data in its own right, naturally. It's a database. So for traceability, the key is to ensure that those product attributes correlate to that physical product as it moves along the chain, right? That's really the key, and in this case, even the challenge. So the transaction details in blockchain can be tracked by what we'd summarize as a digital fingerprint, but the product authenticity has to be, that physical product has to be linked to that data. And there's a number of ways to do it, including what we're all familiar with is QR codes and RFID chips. There's some new innovations such as facial recognition for livestock, which is potentially interesting for live trade for animals. And crypto anchors is another one that's been developed by IBM, and which are basically tamper-proof digital fingerprints that can be embedded into products such as edible ink that link that physical product to the distributed ledger. For some products, they actually naturally have that crypto anchors or a marker doesn't need to be necessarily added, that they have they naturally exist within the product themselves. So some objects, substances and liquids, like a grain of rice or cooking oil, has unique optical characteristics, and with sensors, optical devices, and AI, you can basically learn the optical structure, and that's one way to track. That's, again, IBM's working on. Other things that have been discussed is things like DNA markers, which could be particularly interesting. So all of these, this is an area of development, and so all of these, what we call, I call product process links, have their own costs and implications for scalability. The challenge is to identify what I would say scale-neutral product process links that make supply chain traceability more resistant to dilution, and that's really the key here. So the ability of these technologies to trace a product's origin, carry detailed attributes in each transaction, and even prove its authenticity could have huge improvements for food safety. Enhanced traceability allows for easier regulatory control to detect fraudulent behavior, improves monitoring compliance with SPS and sustainability standards, faster response to disease outbreak and contaminated products, combating food fraud, and potentially reducing risk at the border, reducing friction at the border, excuse me. The second main characteristic is disintermediation, reducing the number of intermediaries in supply chains. So by digitizing this economic activity, supply chain workflows such as documents, contractual processes, and payments, blockchain and smart contracts can reduce transaction costs, reduce risk for sellers, for banks, and bring greater efficiency to supply chains. This allows micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to build a track record from the data stored in their operations and market activity, which can be used to prove creditworthiness, increasing their access to trade finance and other financial services. One example, one of the outcomes would be for trade finance, provide more efficient trade finance. So blockchain and smart contracts could store all information in a single ledger with all participants, as you can see on the left-hand side here in the image, and auto-execute the settlement of payments in real time. This frees up cash flow and working capital for producers and sellers in order to better manage their business. On the right-hand side, you can see instantaneous documentation flows, and what this is basically showing is in the darker image on the top, it's the process of issuing a letter of credit. And typically, the bill of lading moves from the exporter to the exporter's bank, to the importer's bank, to the importer, and all the way back around in paper documentation. This can take multiple days and is one of the causes for slowing down and having these long payment terms. Blockchain and smart contracts, as you can see in the orange, is basically what that's illustrating, is that this could be an instantaneous process within even a day. Third characteristic would be building a digital identity. As supply chain actors transact, record economic and financial activity on blockchain, that same actor builds an identity. So for digital assets like data, This vast amount of data could enhance more accurate and accessible market information. You can imagine, I won't go into all the impacts that could have on supply chain actors in terms of better managing their business and accessing credit, helping banks assess creditworthiness, and so on and so forth. Also has implications for policymakers with more accurate data, potentially, and having more informed policies. And secondly would be physical assets like land titles could be used as access to financial, could be used as collateral for access to financial services, as well as protecting against corruption and fraud, and helping resolve disputes and unlocking large amounts of capital for land titles that have not yet been registered. Fourth characteristic and last is monitoring international agreements. There's, I would say, some potential for implementation and monitoring of agreements like the WTO's Agreement on Agriculture, monitoring and tracking customs duties, as well as executing them with smart contracts, compliance with SPS agreement briefly mentioned, having a better system to more accurately implement the rules of origin, and monitoring international intellectual property rights. Paris Agreement could be particularly interesting for monitoring country commitments, and less so for monitoring for the SDGs. I'd say implementation. And blockchain, if it can achieve this potential, can be a means to achieve the SDGs in a number of areas for agriculture, and here you can see I list a few of them. So lastly, what's the way forward? I think that the first step is events like this and many others that are taking place to inform the public sector on the applications for blockchain in food and agriculture, and bring together certainly the private sector into the discussion, in my view. Secondly, which is very vitally important, secondly is addressing the numerous challenges, and by no means I can go through them all, which range from technical, regulatory, institutional infrastructure, and capacity development that are needed for widespread adoption. A few that I can mention are I think, quite a huge piece of work is merging legal frameworks and legacy systems with blockchain and smart contracts. This could be areas like bearer documents for allowing for digital bearer documents and digital signatures for trade finance. This is one area, and even intricacies like this would need to be changed in legislation to allow for these types of transactions to take place. Ensuring interoperability between blockchains themselves. There's many, there's not one, as probably we're familiar with, and also with some of the legacy systems that take place, that are currently in existence, would be very important. Food safety would be one area to mention. Improving digital infrastructure in developing countries in rural areas, as we know, is kind of an overarching theme for digital technologies in general. And I think I'll flag probably one of the most important, in my view, is coming back to this product process links, and that is ensuring that improving the effectiveness and accessibility of these the product process links that connect that physical product to the product attributes that's registered in blockchain, which will ensure product authenticity, which is really what this is about: capturing value as products move along the supply chain, and consumers we need to make sure they're getting what they are supposedly getting in order to really have value, and actually be a better system for traceability that's more resistant to dilution in supply chains. And lastly, I would say really important would be creating this enabling environment that's been mentioned already, to ensure the productivity gains generated by blockchain can be shared by all market participants. This would be very key as the technology scales. Thank you very much. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. There will be an opportunity for question and answers, but we'll just proceed to the next presenters, and so the four presentations will follow each other, and thereafter have a discussion. And our next presenter is Chris Addison, Senior Expert, Data for Agriculture, CTA. Chris Addison is a Senior Program Coordinator for Data for Agriculture in the ICT for Agriculture team. He leads the Blockchain in Agriculture project, which supports blockchain in agriculture across the ACP through knowledge exchange and experimental projects. He has worked with the Technical Center for Agriculture and Rural Cooperation, CTA, for the last 6 years on digitalization and developed CTA data for agri project work. Previously, he was at the International Food Policy Research Institute, managing online communications and working on capacity building in Africa, covering the websites and data portals. He worked as director for One World Europe, serving a membership of 150 development organizations with internet services. Mr. Edison, you have the floor.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to start by just explaining a bit about why blockchain is so important in this whole idea of the transformation of agriculture, and in particular why we need it in the digitalization agenda. Tim Berners-Lee, when he was working on the web, soon recognized that there was a major issue with going digital, and that was the issue of trust. So I think most of you will have noticed that over the last couple of years, in your web browser, when you go to a website, it used to always say http://www.cta.int. I should make an advert for my own website, I suppose. But now there's an S that has crept into that, https://. And that S is recognizing that the original protocol for transferring data digitally wasn't enough, and there needed to be a kind of security system behind the web page that ensures that you know you have more confidence in that site, and you know it's not being used to collect other information from you or other things behind. Now, we may not understand exactly how HTTPS happens and what really the difference is there, but blockchain is a little bit the same. We haven't got that trust element in the records in databases. What blockchain allows you to do is when you've entered that particular entry, the system will generate those cryptocodes which link one transaction with another, and that generates it in such a way that the privacy code is so complicated, it's extremely difficult to change that record. Now, I think we have to recognize things change all the time with computing. So it'll be a constant battle as to how that code is secured and how opportunities to hack it are in place. But they will not be economically worthwhile in most of the types of transaction we're talking about. And that's why blockchain is so important for what we're looking at. It's there, it's real. $1.2 billion market in 2018. If you believe the press releases of the various report studies coming out from sites like MarketWatch, that's due to grow with an compound annual growth rate of 80.2% to 23.3 billion in 2023. So that's the total blockchain market. For agriculture, we're talking a small fraction of that, 60.3 million right now, growing to 429.7 million. Now that's all the aspects of agriculture. What I'd like to zoom in on is what's actually happening at some scale right now in Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific. And as mentioned by Misha, these applications are taking form in a range of ways. So we've heard a lot already about the traceability transparency, but that has implications for food safety. It has implications for certification, being sure your product is organic or fair trade. But there are other areas that have a huge impact on the type of agriculture we're looking at, particularly from CTA, where we're focusing on smallholder farmer and agricultural development. We're looking at resilience, so some of the insurance applications are extremely important to us. We're looking at access to finance, a crucial element of agriculture which is so difficult. How do you borrow that resource to invest in planting and the inputs to grow a crop when you don't get that return until the harvest. Also opportunities for confidence of larger buyers in the smallholders, allowing market access because you know these records are far more difficult to fabricate and that you can have confidence in those systems. We're not operating in isolation, so particularly with rural communities, the whole transfer of finance across borders is so important. So remittances does play a role, and particularly crowdfunding for agricultural enterprises is another area where blockchain has played a role. The logistics, we heard from the Secretary General how crucial that is in so many of the agricultural industries. And without land and a clear understanding of who owns that land, we don't have agriculture. It's very hard to continually sustain the agricultural production. So blockchain plays a role in all of these areas across the ACP with a whole range of different applications. So there are these advantages of having a system that you can trust, that is difficult to change, that is transparent, that's decentralized. We don't necessarily need bricks and mortar. We don't need a big bank building to manage some of this. This was the great excitement when it first started with the cypherpunks offering this up as an opportunity to question the big banking concerns, the way a lot of business was structured. So these are potential advantages that could be seen in growing it up. What we see as practical advantages, smart contracts, the idea that it's not necessarily a personal decision, someone goes and visits a place to decide whether an insurance payment is made or not. Instead, it can be an automated process based on satellite imagery or on weather measurements. The opportunities for ID control, the possibility that an individual can take control of those ID elements, because the types of application available with blockchain would allow that kind of verification. And that's been used certainly in the food security area by the World Food Programme. This link between consumer and producer has already been mentioned in the introductions. So important then that you can validate that information. Many opportunities there with this certification and consumer confidence. But this doesn't come without challenges. As we move on into implementation, we find that perhaps the entry costs aren't as small as we might think. I think we'll hear more about that during the day. And that some of the original ideals of us always having public blockchains and open data, in reality, we've had to adjust to the real life situation. So the idea of blockchain, that consumer competence, the marketing opportunities of saying your application is powered by blockchain, overrides how much that openness is actually built into some of the applications. So, of course, we see building on existing private networks and looking at how those kind of systems develop. There's a need for awareness and access to the skills, and as my director, Michael Hailu, mentioned, that's the area we've been looking at. This afternoon in Rome, we have a number of young entrepreneurs from Togo, Jamaica, and from the Pacific, speaking about their own experiences in integrating blockchain into their applications. So it's important to raise that awareness of quite what the possibilities are here and how developers can incorporate that into some of the locally developed systems. We heard the need for policy, the openness of the algorithms, and looking at the ownership of these systems. Blockchains still rely on that data that's flowing through the application. Who owns that data? And how do you ensure communication through good standards and interoperability, and many of the basic digital challenges we have whenever we're exchanging data for agriculture across such a myriad of actors. So most of you will have heard about blockchain from Bitcoin, and that comes about because those codes I was talking about to make the transaction secure have to be generated by a computer that's going to take a lot of resources to generate that code. That work becomes valuable to this whole transactional process. And it's on the basis of the value of that work that these crypto coins were generated. And so whilst that's where blockchain has seen a lot of the advance, in the agricultural applications we've seen in the ACP, that is a minor element of most of the applications we're talking about. Instead, they link with these other kinds of tools. Crucial is the timestamp, the date stamp, that particular activities happened at that point in time, and you can't go back and change the time and date of that transaction. The second point is, it's only as good, as was mentioned before, as the information you put into the system. So, particularly in the agricultural context, the more we can link in the Internet of Things, the sensors, the fact that on a production line this might be a scanner reading a QR code. The QR code is that identity for the product. That might be an RFID chip instead, so it might be embedded in the product, be read automatically as we do with contactless with our cards right now, or it may be a scanner reading a QR code. It's also used a lot with ID technology, introducing an identity card to prove you were there at that point. We're working with a project in Uganda, Igara T, where they're using digital balances at the point of collection for the TSAC. They need to know that the farmer is there at that location at the same time. They need some form of ID technology to show that farmer is involved in that growing process of producing the product. We heard a bit about smart contracts. You know, if certain conditions exist, if X and Y plus 1 equals Y plus 1 and A equals B over C, then do this. You know, if the satellite image shows flooding over these successive period of days, then make the payout. So these algorithms can generate a payment in a smart contract effectively without human intervention, except in producing that initial algorithm. So it's really important those algorithms are open and known. And finally, most people will see blockchain on their phone in an application when they scan a product in the supermarket. And I agree with what was said by the introduction from BMZ. This will be far more commonplace in 20 years' time, but it does exist in some supermarkets right now. And we'll hear, I think, more about that from some of the possibilities. So all I'm going to do now is very quickly, I make no apology for just showing the slides and saying a short piece very quickly, because all this is available online through the cases that we've featured on the CTA site. And that's through work we've been doing with Wageningen University and Jacqueline Bolt, and also my colleague Aseni Sanu, who will be collecting extra cases from people here. So if he approaches you, please volunteer information. AgUnity then, already being used at small scale in Papua New Guinea, in Kenya and the Solomon Islands, is really looking at fair contracts on the blockchain. So this is looking at farmers in cooperatives and looking at how you can build that trust of the farmer in the cooperative, so that when they bring in a certain weight of goods and it's put in the ledger, there's no dispute about what that amount is. At the moment, the farmer may not be in a position to read that ledger easily, but with the new system, they actually have to acknowledge receipt on the phone that the buyer has. So there is a transaction where both the farmer and the buyer are registering in the same system. The next example, looking at insurance and finance, EtherRisk, we'll be hearing about other possibilities later. Again, this is where the insurance is only paying out with a specific with specific conditions. Right now, EtherRisk is working with Oxfam in Sri Lanka, but they're just starting to build a system with M-Pesa in Africa. So another application that's coming into place. There's also the question of finance. Ethic Hub is an example here, and as I said, we've got many of these on the CTA website, so please, if you want more detail, go there to see that. But this is really looking at the unbankable, farmers who wouldn't have access to finance otherwise. Because we can put this blockchain confidence to a wider group, we can look at attracting investors through crowdfunding from other areas. And whilst this one is initially in Mexico, again they're looking at running a similar system in Kenya and looking at opportunities here. But the advantage here is they're thinking really about that trust element. So they've also built up a guarantee fund, for investors. So if the individual's investments don't make a return, there's that guarantee fund to cover. In the Pacific, World Wildlife Fund looking at tracking and tracing materials. I think we'll hear a bit more about this later on in the second panel as well. Tuna packaging, RFID chips when the fish is caught, as it's taken to market, replaced by QR codes for the consumer, so they can track all the way back to how that fish was caught, both in terms of sustainability of the fisheries, but also in terms of fair rights for the fisher folk. And then, just coming to a close, Fair Food is very much involved in traceability. Having started with coconut, they're now looking at coffee in Ethiopia, and we'll hear some other examples in the second panel. I mentioned that land was very much at the core of this, obviously of the agricultural concerns, so land ownership. This application, Land Lay-by, has been interesting working in Ghana and Kenya. And the issue is having a local system for the ownership to at least register understanding. The difficult bit is working out how you make the link with the local authority, how you really equate the ownership or the rights to farming with the government system. So there's still work to be done here. But some major countries are already using blockchain systems. Provinces like Western Australia are already using blockchain for some of their registry. And then finally, AgriWallet, looking at savings and credit status in Kenya. This system again links with M-Pesa, but you can make specific tokens, so this is using cryptocurrency. You can have specific tokens that can only be spent within that ecosystem for agricultural inputs, for example. So both diaspora can contribute funds just for that purpose, but also development agencies can provide, or governments can provide subsidies through that way. At the same time, it's linked heavily with the farmer's own saving, where they can earn additional cryptocurrency. So just to finish by saying next steps, we have a partners meeting of the 4 projects that we're putting together on the 28th of May. And we're looking also to work with the Fork on their work on a food systems transparency meeting on the 19th, 20th of September this year in Amsterdam. But if you have a specific interest and would like to be follow up on this, we have a community sign-up page at bit.ly AgriBlock Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Louis de Brain. Is a blockchain leader for IBM Global Business Services in Europe. Louis is driving many IBM blockchain programs where IBM works with companies that are world leaders in their industry to install inherent trust and dramatically improve transparency in the ecosystem in which they operate. One of these programs is global trade digitalization, aimed to reduce the flow of physical documentation accompanying goods and the time required to clear goods from source to destination. He leads a number of blockchain development projects and is also closely working with the Linux Foundation, Hyperledger, Fabric Effort, an open source technology used by IBM to develop many enterprise-grade blockchains. He has been appointed to the Strategic Advisory Board of the Center for Resilience Engineering of the 4 collaborating technical universities in the Netherlands. In his capacity, he advises companies on the use of blockchain in the attainment of Sustainable Development Goals and the Critical Infrastructure Protection Forum. Mr. De Brain, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you, distinguished attendees. Great to listen to the previous presenters. They've mown away quite a bit of the grass that I was wanting to cover, but that's great because we have a meeting of minds here. And what I would like to do is focus in the end of my presentation on a very specific blockchain application that IBM has put in the market, IBM Food Trust, as you see here. And but prior to that, I would like to focus on some of the challenges that IBM is working with many partners and some of here at the table to make blockchain a reality, and where it really comes from. And it was mentioned before, of course, that Bitcoin is really the first application of blockchain that we know. Blockchain is actually a member of the technologies that we call distributed ledger technologies. Misha also mentioned that before, which is wider than just blockchain. Blockchain is a specific implementation of that. And it's actually much older than Bitcoin. I think many of you remember the file sharing services of the early part of this century, end of last century, Napster, Kazaa, LimeWire. And they were typical examples of users coming together and bypassing existing market structures and sharing information on the internet. And that was a very dramatic development for the media industry and totally disruptive. So that was the first time really that we saw how powerful distributed ledger technology can be. Bitcoin was the next one, and that was more in the financial industry, transacting with each other using information that was all related to currencies and to value that is being transacted. And the interesting thing of these two examples is that they both were only focused on information. Media files, songs, films, financial information, it's just information. And that made them also relatively easy. I don't want to say play down anything of the complexity of these technologies, but it is much easier if you only deal with information on the internet than when you have to start to connect with the real world. And this is also what Michel mentioned and also Chris, when you come to real assets that you have to represent, livestock, as you also mentioned from the Karoo, and other objects. When you want to bring those into a blockchain, you have quite big challenges to make sure that what you are showing is actually the object that you are dealing with, sharing with everybody. So that's a major difference from the initial developments in blockchain, such as the distributed ledger technologies for file sharing and Bitcoin. However, we all saw that the opportunity is enormous, and they tackle issues that wasn't possible to tackle before. Blockchain is a way to come together and deal with the enormous complexity of ecosystems that we nowadays have. It's probably the only way. Saying that the only way, they very closely work together, of course, with technologies like the Internet of Things, like not quantum computing, that will come in the future, but what I want to say is artificial intelligence. That's a very important one that also comes together. So it doesn't stand in isolation, but blockchain is a key element, key ingredient of solving these issues. So IBM has very quickly realized that the limitations of the existing blockchain technologies, such as Bitcoin and some of the other ones, made it difficult to create enterprise-grade blockchains. I won't go into detail on that, but it has been a reason that we have started to develop, during the introduction was mentioned, a technology called Hyperledger Fabric, which is adopted by the Linux Foundation, and it's the fastest growing project in the Linux Foundation ever. And it's an open source technology. So IBM has been at the start of this, and we have donated all our efforts to the Linux Foundation, and now hundreds of companies, organizations, large and small, are working together to make this blockchain technology probably the blockchain technology of choice for larger organizations. So IBM has has been very much focusing on making blockchain work, and in our name is business, international business machines. So it's a combination of business and machines. And blockchain, the technology part, the machine part, so to speak, is, I don't want to say it's solved. It's a burgeoning technology, as also Mr. Pletziger mentioned. But a lot of these technologies have proven to work. We've seen that with the previous examples that have been given. But the real challenge is to make large-scale blockchains work. It's not so difficult to create a small app example and then say, hey, it works. But the real challenge is to make it really work for the masses. And that's really what we're trying to do. So major part of blockchain, the challenge of blockchain is to organize, and these sort of gremiums are very important for that we come together and find standards and approaches that we all rally about. This is also why we are a member of mentioned by Mr. Oldhoff, the International Association of Traded Blockchain Applications. We were one of the founding members of that because we believe that these sort of associations will drive the adoption of large-scale blockchains and avoid that we will stay with a landscape that is very scattered, with lots of small initiatives that have little impact. That not to say that it's very good to have all these initiatives. It's very important that young people and everybody are starting to test these technologies, understand their impact, but this organization into larger solutions is very important. We see as an important driver to larger blockchain applications, the platforms that we are driving at the moment. Of course, I come to a moment to IBM Food Trust. But apart from that, we are also working on TradeLens, which is a application to do logistics. Those are the trade lanes really for logistics, for container logistics that are worldwide being used for transportation usage. It's typically in a situation where there is no one organization managing this process. There are lots of organizations dealing with this. You have customs, you have banks, you have transportation companies, you have the final shippers and the final customers. So many organizations have to work together. This is not organized, and we see blockchain as a very good solution to do that, and we have hundreds of organizations already making use of this solution, and we started there also with working together with one of the incumbents in the industry, and that is Maersk. Maersk, large container shipping organization, if not the largest in the world. And by doing that, you make a ripple in the water, and not just a small one, but really a wave. And lots of organizations and companies say, well, if such an organization is doing this, then perhaps we should lend an ear to that and start collaborating with them. The same thing with Worldwire, an IBM financial blockchain application that aims to do clearing and settlement of payments, international payments, in a matter of seconds, and not as it is now, when it takes weeks and you don't know exactly how much you pay for it. So that's another application. And of course, IBM Food Trust. And with IBM Food Trust, we very quickly partnered with large organizations, the first one being Walmart. Walmart, of course, the largest retailer in the world, but here in Europe also with Carrefour, for instance, also a very major retailer. And this makes that you start to make this large wave, and not just in a little pond, but really in the ocean, and see many people and organizations working together. And that's really the goal of blockchain, to get as many parties working together. Now, the technology that IBM is using is not the open technologies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum mentioned before. Nothing wrong with that, but we have chosen for the Hyperledger Fabric usage of that. And that is often referred to as a permissioned blockchain technology, and that's correct. That should not be confused with a private blockchain. These blockchains are not private. Just like you use your mobile phone and you will be working with Vodafone or any other organization, that doesn't mean that they're not open. They can all work together. And there's also not, we don't expect there to be a mother of all blockchains, that IBM Food Trust is necessarily the only one, but it's going to be one of the major ones that will work together with others. And for this reason, we are also working a lot in standardization on interledger protocols that blockchains and other systems will work together. Without further ado, I want to dive deeper into IBM Food Trust and give you a short overview on what IBM Food Trust does. So it's aimed at one of the most personal elements that we all have. We all eat every day. We serve food to our dearest, and we want to be sure that that food is right. It's been mentioned before that it doesn't contain elements that you don't want, and also that it's fair traded, and preferably also with as low as possible a carbon footprint as possible. So these are the enormous aims that we all set with IBM Food Trust. But every large voyage starts with a small step. And so we really made real steps, and IBM Food Trust is available as we speak. So the overview, end-to-end global traceability and transparency and efficiency. That's really the overall goal. That's what we've heard from everybody so far. And creating a trusted connection, and this trust is so vital because there is not a trusted third party that we all can rely on when we are dealing with not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, but even millions and billions of participants and on a blockchain. There is nobody who can check this. So there is this mechanism of having a immutable ledger that actually provides trust for all of us is absolutely vital. And the focus of this is really the consumer, because we are altogether the final reason why economy is driven. It's all for the end consumer. We eat it. Very important is the use of existing standards. The last thing we want to do is build new things that have to be done. There are very valuable existing standards in the world. GS1 is one that we have worked with from the very early phases. IBM is one of the developers also of the barcoding technology. So that sort of existing standards for interoperability and creating connectors with existing systems and new systems are vital to create food safety. Food safety is about very specific use cases. Some have been already mentioned, track and trace, traceability, but also food recall. If something is wrong, then that you as quick as possible can recall it. And one of the first applications that we have is actually on certificate management. It's been mentioned before, for instance, to have the lamb that you mentioned certified as being the lamb that you want. Ideally, you want to have crypto anchors that would really specify piece of lamb that you will buy in a supermarket that it is that lamb that was mentioned. But in the way up to that, we can start with things like certificate management, that you know who issued that certificate is not copied, that it's unique, and that you can always go a step back or a step forward in the chain to check that the product that has been delivered is actually the product that was, and that you can hold somebody accountable for that. That's very difficult at the moment. Certificates have that goal. But often certificates are used to exempt yourself from errors. If something's not right with the product, you say, yeah, but I had a certificate, look at this. But now you can't get away with that anymore, because a certificate is immutably lodged into the blockchain, and only if that certificate is available in your hand, you can say, I know absolutely sure that this product comes from somebody, and that person can be held accountable as well. So that's a step forward, step back that you always have to do in the blockchain, and we want to move further and further back, all the way up to the ingredients that were used to nourish an animal or to make produce grow, for instance, to make also that a part of the blockchain. So here you see a couple of names that are already taking part in this IBM Food Trust event. There are more than that, just these, but you see these are major players that are also asking from their suppliers to use the blockchain technology. So by this you create that ripple effect, very similar to what happened with the internet. As Chris mentioned earlier, 25 years ago there were perhaps 100, 200,000 organizations on the internet, and now there are billions of devices, people all the time using it. So that's the thing we want to achieve. It's a hockey stick effect. In the beginning it's slow, and then all of a sudden it takes off, because if the oil spill is big enough, many organizations will do. So this is all about food safety worldwide. IBM Food Trust certifications, as I mentioned, is the first use case. It's already available. Organizations can at the moment simply log on to the IBM site and become part of this offering, and digitally manage and share their food certifications with their suppliers and with their customers. So to end with this, really the goal, the very ambitious goal that we all set with blockchain, it's not about a few, it's about the 2.7 billion customers that purchase food and put it on the table for all citizens in the world. It's about the 600 regulators that are involved in this, over 570 million growers, the million food suppliers, all the food processors and retailers available. So millions of participants that every day make use of it. And already at this moment we see millions of transactions taking place as we speak. So that's really what I wanted to share with you, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ales Namuli Blasavich, expert blockchain at IA-CAT Uganda. Alice is an associate partner at Katende, Sempempwa and Company Advocates, specializing in commercial transactions. She has over 15 years experience in commercial transactions, specializing in infrastructure projects, project finance, triple Ps, and mergers and acquisitions. She also specializes in technology law with a keen interest in artificial intelligence, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and the law. She represents several fintechs and blockchain technology-based businesses which are reshaping the mode of doing business in Uganda and Africa as a whole. She is the chairperson of the Uganda Legal Tech Network and founder of the Legal Innovation Hub. She also has experience in cross-border transactions, where she has advised various large multinational ventures within Uganda and across East, South, West Africa, and the United Kingdom. She has authored many articles on AI and blockchain. Madam, you have the floor.
No. Okay. It's okay. You can leave it there. Thank you very much, Chairperson, for the kind introduction. I beg you to excuse me. I have a very bad cold, flu, so my voice is not very clear, but I'll literally try my best. Yes, I'm here to make a presentation on blockchain legislation, the case of Uganda. But before I get into the legislation, I thought I would just share with you the importance of blockchain in the agriculture sector in Uganda. As you can see, according to the statistics we have, our economy depends, our economy depends on 26%, rather its GDP depends on 26% of our GDP depends on agriculture, and 70% of the population is employed in the agriculture sector. But unfortunately, or still as the case, we still use a very traditional systems and very dependent on natural conditions, like, I guess, rain and the sun. But currently, what I see in our country is that slowly by slowly we are starting to embrace technology, not only in the agriculture sector, but in many sectors of the country, of the economy. And technology has become extremely, I guess, important to drive the economy. And we believe that definitely not only Uganda, but Africa as a whole will be able to leapfrog. Technology, or the emerging technologies, will help us to leapfrog in terms of development. Generally, blockchain in Uganda, I think it's taken off. We're experiencing exponential growth. There's lots of innovations, blockchain innovations that are going on in different hubs across the country, both supported by the private sector and the public sector. And we believe that with the use of technology, there will be an increase in per capita income, which definitely will bring Uganda to a middle income status in the future. Blockchain in agriculture, like most of the speakers have said, there is no doubt about what blockchain can do when you look at the value chain, right from production to storage to transportation, finance, everything. If you put it on the blockchain, the results are incomparable to definitely what we've always used. And as a country, we are also experiencing a growth of many startups, tech startups, that have come up in this industry, and they're helping farmers to literally connect, connect the farmers to the sellers, and taking out a lot of middlemen from the whole distribution chain. We've seen startups that have come up with finance, a lot of finance, and reaching out to the unbankable population. Of course, when you look at Uganda, the biggest population, or the majority who are able to access finance, really preside in urban centers. But with this kind of technologies, or rather that blockchain technology, these companies have been able to reach out to all the remote areas. Most of the farming takes place in the remote areas. Let me say, we have a northern region where it's very, very difficult to reach. But then you have all these farmers having, being registered or upload or sell their products on the blockchain system through these startups. I've given a few examples, as you can see. Some of them are still, how can I say, they're mainly on the African continent, and they have a little presence within East Africa. But the leaders in the blockchain industry, most of our countries, rather, the leading countries in the blockchain in Africa is Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Rwanda, and Uganda. So most of all these, when you look at some of these startups which have a presence on the continent, just know it's either Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, and Rwanda. So one could be registered in Nigeria, but has a lot of presence in East Africa and South Africa. In Uganda specifically, there are these two examples I want to share with you. We have Kariko Cafe, which started, it's a blockchain company that is able to certify shipments of coffee to try to meet growing demand from consumers for more information about where products have come from. Like the last speaker mentioned, people are becoming very informative, and they want, of course, more information about where the products they're consuming are coming from. And definitely this kind of technology has been able to provide or fulfill that need. And most of the people who have used this system, they can swear most of the benefits, of course, they enjoy transparency, tamper-proof, and goods that have been easily tracked along the supply chain. Another project, or the newest entrant we have, is we will call it a revolutionary project led by a London-listed company called Block Commodities. It's helping finance farmers, or literally trying to fill the lacuna in the ecosystem and provide finance on the blockchain, what we call blockchain for finance. It's also partnering with another agriculture company in Uganda called Pure Grow Africa, which is a leading supplier of high quality agriculture products produced in Uganda. And again, the people who are able to use these services can swear to them that definitely, compared to where they were and where they are now, it's the difference is very big. That's what this company is aiming on, reaching out to 1,000 smallholder farmers in Uganda. They will be selected, of course, by Pure Grow, which is, like I told you, a Ugandan-based company. Yeah, and the last part is on blockchain and policy or regulation. Unfortunately, we don't have any laws. What we have, I would say, is just a framework. And why? I would want to start with the challenges. The challenges are very simple. This, I think, have affected, it's what most countries face. It starts with the complexity of the subject or the industry. So many of our regulators are not aware of what they actually should regulate. They don't understand what exactly it is. So the best thing most people believe is to ignore, and most probably at first they thought it will go away if we ignore it. Then another one is a conflict between the different regulators. We have the finance sector, who are like the central bank, which regulates the finance sector, which has been in the past 3 years issuing statements every 3 months or 4 months, telling people not to do anything with the blockchain and cryptocurrencies. But where did all this come from? Because most people, the other challenge is that there's a misconception between blockchain and cryptocurrency. When you talk about blockchain, everyone thinks you're talking about cryptocurrency. So even regulators, when you talk about the police, to them, anyone, when they're fighting cybercrime, and it's all to do with illicit trade on the blockchain through using cryptocurrency, the first thing they think, no, we have to, we have to keep the masses away, the citizens away from blockchain. So that confusion over the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years has made it very, very difficult for our regulators to sit down and say, what exactly is this? How can we even regulate it? But of course, the innovators, they just went ahead and came up with all these amazing technologies which are already on the market. So what now our regulators are doing is literally to try to understand. They're literally just chasing these innovators, and they're like, okay, what exactly this is? And what I can say is that the good news is we have been, for the last 2 2 years now, the government of Uganda has come out and been very strong in supporting blockchain association and communities. We've had various conferences. There's actually one coming up in June, another blockchain conference. And the president himself and the minister endorsed the idea of working out means to exploit the technologies. And after that, even all like the central banks, the police, the tax authorities, they all came on board, and now they are trying to create awareness and make people understand the difference between blockchain and cryptocurrency. So and also every time I speak to people, I tell people, if you actually don't like cryptocurrencies, it's okay, you can leave that out. But please try to understand that the system offers much more than just cryptocurrencies. And I would also say Uganda, we are very lucky at the moment that it's one of those countries where, even though without regulation, most of the blockchain technologies now and cryptocurrencies are not facing much resistance from regulators. In our neighbors, like in Tanzania, in other countries, people are hunted down. Most startups are closed down because of, I've told you the mystery, because most regulators or governments are still confusing that too. So Uganda, we are at that place where the government of Uganda is fully backing us. The government has also gone ahead to develop policy guidelines and encouraging industries to utilize the same. We have a national blockchain task force that was set up to come up with a policy and to streamline the use of blockchain. It's also anticipated that after the policy has been crafted, adequate legislation definitely will come out of it. But right now, the drafts definitely we are seeing are not, how can I explain it? This is all coming from government. So we, from the private sector, we are also coming on board to work together, because so many of us have been able to get at least some training and understand what the technology is. So working hand in hand with government definitely is the best way of doing this. The government is also in the process of introducing tax mechanisms and incentives that encourage the private sector to invest in blockchain, which we believe this will bring up new opportunities for the public and private sector. The government has also set up institutions. We have different institutions or blockchain academies that have been able to carrying out training and education of the masses. So we think that definitely if the citizens are informed and aware of this technology, the government is trained or educated, very soon, even when the regulation comes out, it'll be much easier to create awareness, which will definitely support growth in return to boost the economy. What I've been talking about, what the government has been doing is basically trying to create an ecosystem that would be able to support blockchain in Uganda. But I think while we are also discussing the blockchain in agriculture, I was thinking it's also important to understand the other industries or fields that are able to support the blockchain in agriculture. Like, for example, in my country, the biggest disputes definitely we have are arise out of land fraud and all that. But if you have if you introduce registration of land on the blockchain, all these systems are able to basically do away with a lot of the fraud that is, in the end, has an impact on the agriculture sector. I'm just thinking this is definitely while we are growing or boosting, the agriculture industry, how about the land, basically where, most of agriculture, of course, most of agriculture takes place. So in Uganda, we have a pilot project that is taking place, which is being supported by government. It's called Bitland, where the government is trying it out to register properties, land, or on the blockchain. But we believe yes, despite the fact the government having so much support and quite enthusiastic about it, the key issues here is that the system, the already existing system, is benefiting so many people. You know, the whole corruption, the chain of corruption. So I'm sure this might not be as easy, you know, to implement as we might think. But clearly, but the fact that we are here, I think it's important to think about it. Then blockchain finance, someone talked about it. These two definitely go together. The agriculture sector needs a lot of finance to support it. So how do we support blockchain finance to make sure that, you know, also the agriculture sector grows? Then lastly, about the other emerging technologies like AI. In my country, there are so many startups that have come up using AI to help with the production system in the agriculture sector, like, you know, determining the weather, particular soils, drones helping, you know, with the sowing and planting. So how do we use also the other technologies that are already on the market to, you know, to promote agriculture on the blockchain? What do I think is the future of blockchain in agriculture in Uganda? I think the future is very, very optimistic. And I believe Uganda, to maximize its full potential, the use of technology, it has to work or to collaborate with the government of Uganda has to collaborate with other stakeholders. It has to make sure that the whole ecosystem is vibrant. You have to invest in a lot of capital. It has to make sure that there are regulatory standards, codes of conduct, training. It has to support incubators, innovation hubs, education institutions. For all this to work, it can't be in a vacuum. Blockchain in agriculture can't be in a vacuum. All these things have to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now to our last speaker for this morning, or for this session before we break for tea. Pedmoni has recently retired as a co-founder and executive director of ETC Group, an international civil society organization headquartered in the Philippines and Canada that since 1977 addresses the impact of new technologies as they may or may not be relevant to the global south and marginalized peoples. ETC has observer status with many UN bodies, including FAO, UN Committee on World Food Security, the Convention on Biological Diversity, UNCTAD, UNFCCC, and IPCC. Petmore has honorary doctoral degrees from the universities in Canada and Mexico, and is a recipient of the Right Livelihood Award in the Swedish Parliament and the Pearson Peace Prize in Canada, as well as the Giraffe Award given to compassionate risk takers. Mr. Moni, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to, I guess, provide the role of devil's advocate in some ways in looking at new technologies. I'd like to, I don't have a PowerPoint, no power and probably no point, actually. But so you have to look at me. But I will identify a couple of documents you can look at afterwards if you'd like to. They're freely available on the internet. One is I led a study for the International Panel of Experts in Sustainable Food Systems titled Too Big to Feed. It's also too big to read. It's fairly heavy, but it led us to, as a panel of experts on food systems, we were looking at corporate concentration in agribusiness, and our conclusion was that the major cause of it, or a major reason for concentration in the food system, is new technology. And that led us to look at those new technologies and to start to look at blockchains in particular. And that also led to a second study, which came out a few months ago, together with a number of German organizations, another program I led, called, and this gives away my views, I suppose, Blocking the Chain. which looks at the implications of particularly blockchain and other big data technologies. Saying blocking the chain doesn't mean that we're against blockchains at all. It means perhaps a cautionary word that the pace of the development of blockchains worry us. In the absence of a better societal understanding of what the chains may or may not do for us, worry us in the context of regulation and who is regulating and or able to understand even the technologies well enough to regulate them at this point, and the need to be aware of the side effects of any new technology, especially a technology that's going to impact our food systems. Nothing is much more close to us than that. So it's a cautionary tone that we need to look at the regulatory environment and look at the kind of side effect implications of new technologies. And that was manifest to us in our first study looking at agribusiness concentration, where we were prompted by the takeover of the largest organic food retailer in North America, Whole Foods, by Amazon. A kind of a merger you wouldn't normally have anticipated, except for because of the new big data technologies and the potential to move into markets that wouldn't have otherwise been anticipated. Perhaps it's also true for IBM Food Trust. One wouldn't have normally associated IBM directly with the food system, but obviously there are synergies there and, again, implications of all of that as well. So it's that awareness, I think, that's got us expressing some concern about how fast the technology is moving and the things that we don't know about the technologies. And they come into several areas, and I'll just identify a few quickly that worry us, that we think need to be explored further. Again, this doesn't mean that it can't be solved. It does mean it means they have to be considered. I'm surprised that so far we haven't talked about the energy costs of blockchains. And I know that varies, and I know there's changes taking place in what the cost is in terms of the energy consumption, but it still is a factor. And to be aware of then, given that energy cost, who will have access to the technologies in general, and of course always the question of who will benefit from them the most. Because there are efficiencies doesn't mean that there's equity. Because there's greater speed or there are benefits accrued doesn't mean the benefits are accrued equitably, and that has to be considered. A second concern we have is again, some of the sort of implications we might not have thought of in terms of land use and land tenure being protected by blockchains. This could be very beneficial in some cases. It could also mean that suddenly peasant producers, smallholder producers around the world find that their land is up on the internet and could be bought or sold or manipulated by others in far parts of the world. Speculation on land could change, possibly because of blockchain access as well, and technologies associated, big data technologies associated with blockchains. Thirdly, of course, is the concern of how far does the chain actually go when you're dealing with a multinational enterprise who can take in wheat or rice or soybeans or corn or palm oil and may use them in any of thousands of different products once it's inside the company? How far does that tracking go? We now see, and we've had recent scandals here in Europe around processed foods, where highly processed foods, where infant foods that are branded the same across all of the European Union, but the actual ingredients of the same branded product in the same size are different when they're sold in Latvia as to when they're sold in Romania as to when they're sold in Germany or France. And that's still, as much as we like to think that we're eating fruits and vegetables fresh and free all the time, the reality is still that more than half of the food that people in the UK at least eat, and almost half in Germany, is highly processed foods. So is that going to be part of, can that be controlled when in those ingredients or not? Do blockchains actually, again, give a false image of equity in the system? Will they show us, as we've seen in the last couple of years here in Europe, that in fact the people picking the tomatoes in southern Italy are unregistered migrant workers who have no access to health care and sometimes even die in the field because of that. Is that evidenced through a blockchain if the information isn't provided? Is it evidenced in the blockchain if workers in vegetable picking workers in the UK are being held in slave-like conditions behind barbed wire with guard dogs, as was discovered a few months ago? Will that show up in the blockchain? Probably not, or it'll be difficult to do that. It depends upon the integrity of the company. Will the system show, for example, as we learned yesterday, that AB and Bev here in Europe was falsifying prices between Belgium and the Netherlands? They were caught in doing that and are paying the price for that, but would that be manifested, that kind of dishonesty be manifested normally, or will blockchains help us manifest that contradiction? I think all of these are areas that need to be looked at and understood. We began this morning by our chair reminding us that one of the goal here is to help smallholder producers know whether or not they're getting a fair price. Well, quite honestly, producers know they're not getting a fair price. They don't need a blockchain to tell them that. Will a blockchain change it is the question. Will it actually make it a fair price in the end of the day? Will it create honor and integrity in the system to assure that it's a just and fair system? I don't think blockchains do that of themselves. It may create a level of transparency that may help to make it possible, but of itself it doesn't do that. The context, again, I think for blockchains, though, has to be widened. It's not just blockchains by themselves. It's not, and blockchains, of course, are only one part of the digital ledger technologies. It is the whole management of big data. It's digital DNA as much as it is the ones and zeros that we're used to in computer technologies. It is managing all of that. It's the Earth Bank of Codes, which propose to use blockchains as they map the genomes of everything on the planet. Understanding that is part of the process, I think, of where we're going with this. And in looking at that wider range of technologies that are part of digital information, there was, I think, a very interesting letter. I tried to find it this morning, and I couldn't find the author of it, but into the Financial Times a couple of weeks ago, proposing that we need to have an international organization on cyber security, which would, in cyber information, which would be an institution that would be created similar to the International Atomic Energy Agency. I was surprised by that, but it's an interesting concept. What's perhaps of more interest, and we've been discussing this with a number of organizations, including with UNCTAD in Geneva, is that we need to create some capacity in the United Nations system for technology assessment, which there is a modest capacity in Europe at the national level and in the European Union collectively, but is still very modest. And there is no such capacity in the United Nations system. But given the pace of technologies, given the importance of technologies, especially around digital information, we need to have something that helps us to all understand it and have confidence that the world is moving in a safe and fair direction, for an equitable direction with these technologies. It's sad for me to think, and I've been around this world for a long time in dealing with at the UN level and also with technologies. It's disappointing to me to recognize that 25 years ago, the UN did have a UN Center for Science and Technology for Development based in New York, which is the significant capacity to monitor new technologies, to advise governments on those new technologies, to suggest alternative technologies, to propose different approaches to managing the technologies. That capacity was wiped out in 1993. Equally, we used to have it in the UN Center on Corporate Concentration, or it wasn't quite called that, UN Center for Transnational Corporations, pardon me. And that allowed, again, developing countries to look at who were the providers of the technologies and what were their options to look at different technologies. What kind of patent arrangements could they negotiate? Royalty arrangements could they negotiate for those technologies? That capacity also disappeared in 1993. So at the beginning of the information age, the UN basically gave itself a frontal lobotomy. It was really lacking that capacity to do those. So I think I would argue, and I think many of my colleagues in civil society would argue, that as we look at these technologies, we do need to build into our intergovernmental systems a capacity to monitor those technologies, to advise on them, not to stop them, to monitor and advise, countries make their own decisions. And we need a capacity as well to be able to monitor the enterprises that are introducing those technologies to us so we know who's doing what to who. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that perspective, which is slightly different from the civil society, and it has to be. That's a conscious of society. Now, since we're running short of time, but because of the opening session, so we took a bit of time from this session. And therefore, I will allow, if there are pressing questions, I know that the presenters of this morning will be around and they will be debating with us in the afternoon. But if there's somebody who wants to have specific questions to our high table and some of the presenters, welcome to do so. I will just allow a few questions before we break for coffee. And Ambassador, your session will start on time. and I know how it will be managed. Any questions? I don't see any. Well, yes. Sir, you have the floor, sir.
A question for our final presenter. One of the things I'm working on, for example, I'm also working at agricultural supply chain products using blockchain. And one of the things we're looking at with that is that often we're trusting the producers to be putting the data in. And as you stated, if there's not integrity from them, if they're putting false data in, it could create a worse problem, or at least that false sense of security that people have. But don't you agree that if there's at least more data provided or more data shared, it might improve the system? I mean, at least right now it's a black box. We don't know what's happening inside of a supply chain, or the public doesn't know. At least if they're sharing it, even if it's a permissioned system where they're the ones reporting and there's not necessarily a public oversight of it, or people can double check and see, if they are lying to the public, companies could be caught more likely. Do you think that at least having more data shared is beneficial in that sense?
For translation.
Sorry. I certainly do agree. It would be beneficial. We need more transparency in agribusiness in general. If you try, there's actually less information, for example, about market share in agribusiness today than there was 20 years ago or 10 years ago than we have today. Try to find out, for example, today what the market share is of the farm machinery industry around the world, and it's virtually impossible to get that data unless you pay a large fortune for it. So I think we need more transparency of all kinds. It's not I would distrust the producer, especially the smallholder producer. I'm concerned about transparency throughout the entire food chain. To the extent that is helpful in this case, that's great. But my major concern about transparency would be around market transparency than it would be around whether or not the mangoes come from that farm in Mexico.
Yeah, okay. I think those are very good comments. What I also would like to add is that blockchain has a disciplining force by making everything transparent and so quickly available through a distributed system to everybody. It's much more difficult to actually forge data or change it because you're going to be caught out very quickly. So it has a self-cleaning effect when properly implemented, of course. Thank you.
Hello, Professor Linson from the MNRC. I'm a neuroscientist. Considering blockchains, don't you think it would be advisable to set up a new global governance infrastructure inviting coordinated collective citizen institution collaboration on an equal footing with equal opportunities? We are faced with a global network of interconnected global challenges that can only be appropriately managed by first setting up a new global governance infrastructure. So perhaps it might be useful to integrate this notion of blockchains with a new global governance infrastructure. Otherwise, I seem to be witnessing, well, people are speaking of a holistic approach. I seem to be witnessing a kind of holistic fragmentation, which isn't exactly the same thing at all.
Thank you. One more question? Want to answer that?
Thank you for the interesting presentations. My name is Lonneke van Genuchten from Fair Foods, who were slightly mentioned also by Chris Edison. Thank you for that. I've got a question for Alice Namuli. Thank you also for your presentation and your dive into Uganda. I wonder, what is the position of this at this moment also of the smallholder farmers? Are they actively participating in blockchain projects or pilots in your country? And also, what is their feedback, or what is maybe results of some research of their participation? Thank you.
Yes, you may respond.
Yes. Well, we have different farmers. We have the farmers in the urban centers, then we have the farmers, like I told you, in the rural areas. Now, the farmers in the urban centers, those ones, it's easy actually for them to understand if you approached them. But I think the major challenge is with the ones outside the urban centers. But the magic to it is that when you teach them, they're very enthusiastic. To them, the most important thing is you just tell them what to do. As long as they have the technology, access to it, it has worked magic. And guess what? This has also created virtual cooperatives. You know, in my country, we used to have cooperatives, but somehow, I don't know what happened. Our 32-year government, what happened? Somehow they disappeared. But this has become very, very powerful to create these virtual cooperatives, meaning it makes it very easy for anyone to know, like from the northern region, there are so many farmers because they are already on a platform, and this is how much actually they are selling their produce, and this is what is available at a particular time, making it also much easier for the logistical companies. But in terms of them as the farmers, it's more of a solution, and they are very, very enthusiastic. That is at least the ones, the clients that I've represented who work with these communities in rural areas. That's the feedback I've got. Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, also there's a kind of restorative power that the technology creates, right? Like making those communities of cooperatives vivid again. Is it?
Yeah, it definitely does. It's shifted the power. They feel very empowered, extremely empowered. One, they don't have to go to the mainstream financial services. Two, the middleman is out of the question. And then the whole idea of, oh my goodness, it has reached the end product, and I know actually the actual price. The actual price used to be that I sell something in a rural area, and then someone buys it at less than $1. By the time it gets to me in Kampala, it's most probably like $5. So you don't understand what exactly, what exactly happened. But here, these are very, they get to know, even me as the consumer, I'm happy that I'm actually contributing this amount of money to the farmer. There's a particular brand of coffee that actually I like. They don't use you're able to know the name of the farmer, the kind of coffee you're taking. Is it Arabica? Is it Robusta? When it was grown, when it was harvested, and how much actually they were paid. For me, that's extremely empowering. And knowing that it feels like there's a connection you have. But I think slowly by slowly, definitely it's going to boost our economy and empower, the citizens.
Thank you. Next question, the Ambassador of Kenya. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to find out what has been done to interest our young people in agriculture. Because you find that is a major problem in our country, I want to believe it's not only in Kenya, but the entire African continent. So can we be given that experience? Number two, we've been told that this blockchain technology can be used to monitor international agreements compliance. What has been the agreement? It's one thing to have an agreement, Mr. Chairman, whether international or otherwise, and another to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I talk about young people in Uganda, how it's been helped?
In Kenya or Africa before you talk about Uganda.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
No, I'm just giving an example how the blockchain is helping Ugandans. First of all, like I told in my presentation, there are all these hubs that are coming up. First, the young people themselves are innovating. They're churning out all these innovations day and night. But also in the agriculture sector, the fact that there's this transparency, even young people are getting involved in agriculture. Before, it was not the case. All of them were running away from the sector and coming to urban centers and doing really jobs that really don't make so much sense. But they are going back because if the industry is productive, they feel empowered being part of the whole process. And that is how they're slowly by slowly getting more involved in the agriculture itself, but also in the innovations.
I think the youth is in Africa are really, well, not only Africa, but because we also had the case from Jamaica and elsewhere, they are involved in innovations and they are experimenting, and some of them under very trying situations, in some of the slums, and they really make some interesting experiments and innovations in some of those things. But we are going to hear more about this as the session goes on. I think we are now going to break for tea. We break only for 10 minutes. And at some stage, if you still haven't had, because there will be another opportunity for exchange during lunchtime. So we just go break for tea, and we are allowed to bring the tea into the room also. Thank you very much. Session adjourned.
We have a very exciting panel 2, which will bring very specific applications with a big focus, of course, on ACP countries as well, from agribusiness like Cargill with a farmers' organization and some very specific value chain in Ethiopia, as well as finance. So I have the pleasure, and we really have to make our presentations on time, because the Ambassador Monte from Jamaica has agreed to chair this panel, but she cannot stay more than 10 past 1. And this also works for our interpreters, because they have to follow their time. So please make the presentations, and we could have some questions as well, additional questions. I hope that all of this morning was answered. If not, we can still bring some. So, Ambassador, thank you very much. You are the Ambassador of Jamaica to Belgium, the European Union. You had also accreditation for France, Luxembourg, Monaco, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, UNESCO, and many others. You are a diplomat by career. You have an extensive work in foreign affairs and trade in Jamaica, but not only on the policy issue at international, bilateral, and regional levels, but also with a very specific field work, training and management experience. I follow you on Twitter. And follower, very active for many things which are of interest, of course, to development for the ACP group, but to agriculture also in particular, and to city, and for all our partners. Thank you very much for chairing this panel, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Isolina. Good morning. Again, to all of you, it is a pleasure to be here. And I'd like to take a quick moment, first of all, to thank CTA Dr. Hailu, Isolina, and the team for this another of the Brussels briefing. I confess that it is my first, not because you have made several efforts to have me here, but because of my schedule. So for me, this is particularly an exciting time, because I'm here, but also because of the subject of blockchain technology. This morning we had a most exciting, thought-provoking especially because we had the devil among us, Mr. Mooney, and it is always very good to have that other side, but he did say it is the cautionary role that he's playing. Our appetite has been whetted, and therefore we're looking forward to the second session when we'll be having specific experiences. I just want to say, though, that I have been advised that at the ACP, we have actually begun to contemplate blockchain technology, and as far back as November 2017, when we were looking at innovative strategies to effectively combat privacy and ensure copyright protection in the area of culture. So already the ACP is taking that on board in another area, and we are very excited at the prospects of doing so for technology. I will limit my opening remarks. I am looking forward to what the speakers have to share, all of you, and I do so by beginning with the first. I promised her I would try very hard with the name, Anthe Silimeni Arkangelide, who is from Cargill, representing us from Cargill. She's a business analyst in the data analytics team of Cargill. In her current role, she was involved in several blockchain initiatives, contributed to the development of agricultural digital products, and is supporting Cargill's sustainability efforts. Mrs. Arkangelide holds a master's science degree in management of technology from the University of Delft, and she additionally has a background in chemical engineering. She specialized in supply chain management, and during her master's thesis focused on the opportunities of blockchain in physical trading of soft commodities. She's passionate about bridging the gap between business and IT, and is a system thinker with knowledge in innovation, technology adoption, business process management, and agile practices. I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So we're moving to the second half of the event, and I would like to ask you to bear with me for the next 10 minutes, as I will be presenting you the potential and successes of blockchain applications for the agri-industry. My goal is to offer you some practical insights of agricultural supply chain applications, inspire you, and hopefully energize you a little. So, within the past 2 years in Cargill, we have joined a transformative journey where we experimented with a plethora of cutting-edge technology concepts, ranging from Internet of Things to artificial intelligence to big data or machine learning. Blockchain is one of the technologies we have been incubating the past few years. From a top-down approach, we are actively contributing to open source code, and we recently sponsored the Hyperledger Grid project to help bring maturity, quality, and openness to distributed supply chain solutions. We work with a number of partners where we co-develop a digital tools ecosystem, enabling to build products that address supply chain use cases such as traceability, food safety, or trade settlement. From a bottom-up point of view, we have built specific solutions, such as the pilot of traceable turkeys in North America. And additionally, we are involved in the creation of several digital supply chain platforms, together with other industry players. So, after some years of hard work, we were proud and honored to be in the Forbes Blockchain 50 list. This list was published last month and presented big companies that are leveraging blockchain to transform their industry. One of the most common questions we have been asked here is, why is an asset-based agricultural company so engaged with blockchain, after all? In order to understand this, we need to take a step back. So for those who are not familiar with Cargill, here's the company in a snapshot. It is a US-based company operating in farming and agriculture, industrial and finance sectors. We do business in over 65 languages. We have physical presence in 70 countries, and we employ more than 150,000 people. Annually, we are moving 220 million tons of goods across the oceans. where we touch about 20% of the world's food today. And we are on a mission of feeding a growing planet of 7.7 billion people, a population projected to grow to 10 billion by 2050. And we feel the pressure of having such an important task. We are a purpose-driven organization with an unwavering mission to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. We see blockchain as one component that could help us serve this mission. Blockchain is a great example of technology with a purpose. Digital supply chains can help us improve the traceability and transparency of our products, where we can be quick and accurate when addressing food challenges. Imagine if farmers, traders, wholesalers, retailers share their food and agricultural data with each other on a common platform that openly tracks every point in the global supply chain from the soil to the plate. A digital supply chain is one of many ways the food and agricultural industry could improve farmer livelihoods, strengthen food safety and security practices, and give consumers confidence in the food they purchase and eat. To get a better grasp of the value, let me introduce some practical applications. For localizing opportunities in agriculture, we could take a business process point of view. Here we can categorize the applications in the three usual supply chain flows, namely the information, physical, and the financial flow as well. In principle, blockchain can help us either monitor or coordinate any of the mentioned flows. So I will be diving one by one to each of the three cases, going to the information flow. Back in 2017, we partnered with the Netherlands Organization for Applied Scientific Research, commonly known as TNO. Together, we investigated whether and how could blockchain transform paper process into a digital process when programming contract conditions of a trade. We developed a proof of concept for the commodity trading process. For the technology enthusiasts, the prototype was built on Quorum at that time. And we have a picture on the presentation where you can see the capturing of a trade between two parties. And then in this platform, having available the information flow, it could offer neutral and immutable space for virtual cross-chain collaboration, which could allow participants to exchange information faster and with less frictions. Documents stored there, such as a bill of lading or a certificate of origin, would be hard to tamper, and therefore fraud of original information would be effectively prevented. Hence, one source of truth would be available, which would increase transparency as well as efficiency across trading actors. Moving to the physical flow. The physical flow refers to the goods themselves. Storing trustable and immutable data related to the product can contribute in monitoring the goods' identity. Counterfeit products and fraud can be prevented, where information regarding the goods' provenance can be traced. In these ways, best practices can even be enforced to the industries. We pilot such a use case during Thanksgiving of 2017 and Thanksgiving of 2018 as well in the United States, where we offer consumers family farm-raised turkeys that are traceable from the farm to the holiday dinner table. This product was built internally. We wanted to enhance the consumer value there. We wanted to make the track and trace of fast-moving consumer goods quicker and enable transparency. Consumers were able to find out more about their turkey by simply using the code that was in their food packets. A last example was in the financial flow. Almost a year ago, we participated in an early HSBC trading blockchain application, which now evolved into a trade finance consortium for the bank sector. HSBC Bank, on behalf of Cargill, conducted the world's first live commercial trade finance transaction using blockchain technology. The digitalization of the letter of credit removed the need for paper reconciliation because all parties were able to be linked on a single platform here, rather than multiple systems. Therefore, the updates were instantaneous, and it allowed the transaction to be completed in only 24 hours. So the question, what happens when everything goes together? You need to integrate blockchains with each other and other systems in real time. We need then using different technologies and different communication tools. Here, data discovery starts to become relevant, event correlation, API management, security, to name a few. Governance are some important things to consider in real-time applications. So in the bigger picture, blockchain is the tip of the iceberg and is only one component of the solution. We strongly believe that no single company, technology, or digital platform can alone bring innovation to these supply chains. We understand that eventually different technologies should be utilized, industry standards and governance should be agreed upon with all transacting parties, and a legal framework around it is yet to be developed. Keeping this in mind, I would like to close by our top 3 tips moving forward. So number 1, focusing on the problem. You might not even need a blockchain. This is one of the mottos we use internally. Even though we are contributing heavily with engineering solutions, we feel that understanding how to solve business needs should be the top priority. What we realized is that streamlining the actual business process is one of the biggest challenges. First, we would need to standardize across the boundaries of a single organization, with all of our partners, with all of our stakeholders, custom authorities. Then we can try to digitalize such operations by replicating business logic. And only then we could talk about automating. In addition, solving problems in an incremental fashion does not always require an over-engineering from a technology point of view. At the end of the day, it's not about the application of any fancy technology. It breaks down to the business problem, like helping farmers prosper or improving sustainability. Number 2, embracing partnerships. We find that industry partnerships are key. Supply chains rely on quality of data from suppliers, producers, distributors. It is really a network system. Solutions built in a vacuum will be rejected by the industry, while embracing partnerships could help with vast adoption. We have been adopting a unique paradigm of cooperation, where we get the chance to talk openly with competitors in meetings, sitting on the same round table in order to face common problems. This is the way to modernize the global food and agricultural systems, where data and technology choices, together with processes, are made from the industry for the industry. And the last point for today, building on open standards. We have been engaged in maturing open distributed platforms. We are proud to work with industry partners, and yes, competitors, to get after food safety and food security, climate change, or help people thrive. This is the only way to make supply chains more inclusive, creating new markets for farmers and developing economies. So with these 3 learnings, I would like to close the presentations, and we can discuss questions later on with the rest of the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. We congratulate you on being the Forbes list of the top 10 blockchain companies. And we take note that you have reminded us that blockchain is only part of the solution. And we thank you for the 3 tips with which you left us. Now we're going to move from the top 50 on Forbes list to perhaps the top 1 on the Farmers Organization. Dr. Theo de Hager is president of the World Farmers Organization and former president of the Southern African Confederation of Agricultural Unions and of the Pan-African Farmers Union. He's also chairman of the board of Agri All Africa, a board member of FANFPAN, and serves on the board of Agri Limpopo, where he is responsible for land reform, transformation, farmer development, and Africa liaison since 2004. He has farmed in South Africa since 1997 with timber and subtropical fruits. And I have to mention them because he farms avocados and mangoes, among my favorites, as well as macadamia nuts, and also keeps goats. He's associated with curried goat from Jamaica. Thank you so much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. 7 years ago, when I first took up a responsibility in farmers' politics, I had this ambition to visit more farms than conferences and to talk more to farmers than to agricultural experts. I dismally failed, but at least I'm still trying. And while failing, I at least try to talk about the visits to farms when I get to conferences. I was invited to this amazing farm in Africa, which unfortunately no longer exists because of conflict between the partners. When I was invited, I dressed in my farm clothes, but I was taken to the 5th floor of a building in a CBD, where a farmer sat in a low light environment with a number of screens in front of him. And he showed us these 2 monitors are the information that comes from the drones on the farm. And they started up with first light on that morning and flew over the farm, sending data back to this operations room. There's no one on the farm, he said. All 3 of these drones reported a problem of stress on a 2.5 hectares field of beetroot. And the system advised that there's a 92% chance that this stress, which occurred on 2.2 square meters, might be related to insects. And the system also suggested that another drone should fly much lower to confirm. And this farmer only had to override the decision or the suggestion, which he did not do within the limited time span. So the 4th drone flew and confirmed. And the system suggested that it should be sprayed with the insecticide. And because he did nothing, one of the drones linked up with a 1-liter tank of pesticide and a little spray bar and sprayed only that 2.2 square meters. When we went out to the farm, and we were the only humans there, he showed us that the data which came from the moisture meters in the fields proposed that those 2 fields which were planted should not be irrigated today, still wet enough. The second 2 fields should be disked. They were already plowed 2 weeks ago before the rain. The next 2 fields should now be plowed today. And the next 2 fields should be left alone, too wet. And because he did nothing, this is what happened. When we reached the farm, tractors without drivers were actually disking. And I went onto the field, I picked up a stick, and I put it in the way of one of the tractors. And I walked out. And when I reached the farmer, he showed me that he received an SMS on his tablet saying, unknown obstacle in the way. But that tractor stopped about 2 meters from the stick, and after a minute switched off its engine. So I went in again, removed the stick, the engine started up again, and the tractor continued. But this time he sent an SMS to say, there's a spare part that is running at a few degrees higher temperature than it should. Something is going to break here. The suggestion is, and he had only a few seconds to respond, this tractor should be relieved of duty and go to the workshop. And he did. It hooked off the implement. Another tractor came around the corner, filled itself up with diesel and oil, and hooked the same implement and went on exactly where the previous one stopped. And I said to this farmer, this is the stuff horror movies are being made of. It means in 5 or 10 years from now, there will no longer be someone like me farming with my hands. And he said, no, someone like you will have smaller fingers to press small buttons on smartphones. Things are changing. And I said to him, so when I misjudge or miscalculate, I pay a price on my farm. How can I trust the system? His answer was, you are on the wrong side of 50 to understand blockchain. Now I am on the wrong side of 50. But it made me read about it. And I realized that we did nothing wrong to be managed out of the chain. We did everything right. It's just the nature of the chain has changed. And if you cannot keep up to the cutting edge of new technology in this fourth industrial revolution, you will not remain in business. But what does it say to us, the farmers from Africa, of which the vast majority are smallholders? Where does that leave us? We have said a few times in discussions here at the Brussels briefings that Africa has everything money cannot buy: the weather, the land, the water, the people. What we lack are the stuff which you can bring about through investment: knowledge and expertise, experience, financing. Africa got more than €1 trillion in development aid for agriculture over the last 18 years. And we cannot really show the dent we've made with it. We need the credibility to attract the investment. Capital is as shy as a deer. You scare it and it runs. And we need to be able to trace what happened, where, and by whom. Why? Africa's agriculture does not grow and does not lure the investment it should because of a lack of trust. And if anything, as farmers, we have high hopes that blockchain and the incorruptible part of that can bring about change on the kind of governance which is needed to lure investment. Because if you look at the history of Africa's interaction with the previous industrial revolutions, especially on communications technology, the first one, when the Morse code was introduced, it was also introduced to Africa. The second industrial revolution, when the telephone was developed, we kind of missed that in the largest part. It came to our cities, but even until today, we've never had the landlines which covers the other continents. Then came the third one, mobile phones. And today, very few smallholder farmers do not at least have access to mobile technology. And going forward into the smartphone, I don't know why they still call this thing a phone. It is as good as calling your latest model Audi a cigarette lighter on wheels. It has that function too, but it is so much more. And although my generation of farmers do not really use all the functionalities on this stuff, there's a new generation of young farmers out there in Africa who not only understand it, but they love it, and they are taking it to new horizons. With blockchain, we can bring the uncorruptible flow of information and data into our value chains, which means from the input providers, from the financiers, and very, very important too, the crop insurers, those whose businesses are built on data, right through the production system and down the value chain, the processing, the logistics, the chain stores, up to the consumers, for whom labeling becomes more and more important. You can bring trust into the system. And this trust is not only built on one dimension of it, but on the complete picture. On this farm I visited, I've noticed how similar machines elsewhere in the world, on the opposite side of the world, could also learn from what happened on their fields and share it with each other, all other similar machines in the world, much faster than what any human could do. But for me as a farmer, this is broadly a schematic presentation of how our brains work. The farmer wakes up in the morning, the first thing in your mind is risk. Which risks am I being exposed to today, and how do I manage those risks? Weather risks, resource risks, economic risks, prices, markets, etc. Tariffs, labor risks, locational risks, the biological risks, health risks, financial risks, policy and political risks, infrastructure risks. And each one of these needs to be considered and managed. Now, can you imagine what immutable data can do in the management of those if it could be fed back to me and in a dashboard style on my smartphone or my tablet? On this particular farm, when I asked, why beetroot? How obscure. I've never seen beetroot in this district. Why did you plant beetroot here? He said, because the system proposed beetroot. Given the availability of beetroot at a certain time on the markets, the availability of logistics, and the prices in that time of the year on the markets. Because on my farm, usually, it would have been the agent selling the seeds that needed to convince me. And I had no way to check the data on which he proposed this. You always have it in the back of your mind that he has a surplus of this kind of seeds. He has not reached his targets, and he need to find a few farmers to buy this particular variety of seeds. But as it was said before, and this is for us very important, this is not, blockchain is not to be seen in isolation of the rest of the elements of the fourth industrial revolution. Blockchain goes with Internet of Things, big data, robotics, artificial intelligence, shaping the farmer of tomorrow and the production system of tomorrow. Which means that we are moving from business intelligence, where as a farmer you had to see how complete could you have your set of data on which you took a management decision, to business analytics, to trust the system and be sure that all relevant data has been considered in taking you to a decision. Moving from where you decide to do something to where you decide to override a decision. You need a decision not to do something. Now, traditionally in financing, a farmer takes his land, title deed, to a bank as security to have a loan to borrow money to pay for his inputs. This model has not worked well in Africa. There are actually only 4 countries in Africa where this model is efficient. South Africa, Namibia, pockets of Botswana, and pockets of Zambia. The rest of Africa, very little free title deeds on agricultural land. So there is no collateral, which means lack of financing, lack of investment. For us as farmers, it's very important that blockchain technology brings a different dimension to that, where you can actually use offtake agreements along with crop insurance to do value chain financing. It is possible when you can trust all the data in the value chain, where an offtake contract can serve as collateral given that you can really measure the inputs and the actions in every step of the production process, and also downstream, follow the stream of money. We have piloted that in Arusha when I was still with Sakao, with the assistance of a few development aid partners. Only thing which we did more than only the bare value chain financing itself was we've set up a little collateral fund as a resort for first risk. If everything would have gone wrong in this pilot project, we could have gone to that collateral fund. You see, no matter how you do your calculations, when you use an offtake agreement as collateral, you need an own contribution of at least 30%, if you are lucky. And much of it depends on the integrity of the crop insurance, managing the risk of an act of God. And that is what the smallholders in Africa do not have. They do not have that own contribution. What we did in Arusha is we went to 5 input providers, companies in the space of fertilizers and agrochemicals, mechanization, diesel, and seed. And we asked them each to keep 6% of their turnover on this project into the pool, a portion of their profit. And when we honor our offtake agreement, they would also have that final 6% payment. And the 5 times 6% gave us the 30% own contribution. What we got as a freebie, did not budget on that, and it worked wonderfully, was that we had excellent extension services, because a portion of their money was still in the soil. So we had visits every second week from the fertilizer company, but the seed company was there every week to look after their interests. And the blockchain technology only enhances the trustability of this kind of financing. We cannot wait for politics to change the title deed paradigm in Africa. We see, as farmers, we see blockchain as shortcutting that route. You may say, how feasible given the current paradigm of smallholder farming? You know, everything a smallholder cannot do because he's too small can be done in a cooperative. 100 or 200 smallholders clustered under one umbrella becomes bankable and becomes insurable. Just saying that with my selfish hat as a farmer's leader who's in the business of organizing farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hager. I feared, as you progress with the story of the drone, that you are going to conclude with saying that there is no need for human at all anywhere on the farm. So I'm happy that there's still a place for us. But I want to thank you so much, and to recall that in this morning's discussion, and as we're progressing now, one of the principles that keeps coming up is that of trust. We've heard you talk about immutable data, uncorruptible flow of information. That again is a continuation of one of the principles on which by which we need to be guided as we look at that in terms of the possibilities and the prospects, but also the potential for issues. I want to thank you for that. And as you spoke, in my mind, I was thinking, how do we get our small farmers in all countries to make the leap? And I think that you have been leading us down that path. So I thank you so much. And so I will now turn for the continuation of the conversation to our third speaker, Sandy Govers from Moye Coffee Fair Chain, Ethiopia. Ethiopia, the known origin of coffee, but he also knows very well that one of the best coffees in the world is a Blue Mountain coffee from Jamaica. So we're looking forward to your presentation on this, and I want to introduce him by indicating that Sandy Govers studied business economics at Nyen Road Business University and Vrije University in Amsterdam. After a short career in corporate finance, he embraced entrepreneurship and started his own companies in textiles and high-end fashion. Working across the world, he sourced materials in countries like India, China, and Turkey, and built a wholesale and retail company, including online sales. In 2016, he joined Moye Coffee as business development and international retail manager to support its fair chain mission, that of sharing value in the coffee value chain fairly and equally in order to increase living standards in the country of origin. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Meza, for your nice introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, before telling you more about our blockchain project, I also would like to tell you something about our company so that you better understand who we are and also why we do what we are doing and why we have started using blockchain technology. So, Moye Coffee is a social enterprise, an impact company, and our mission is to restore the balance in the value chain in coffee. And the reason why we want to do it is because it's broken. And this is the situation in coffee. This is a map of the world, the global north and south. You see this little darker green belt over the equator. This is where all the coffee in the world is coming from. It's grown in these countries. These countries are often still relatively poor and depending on development aid. And the processing of all the beans is taking place in the global north. This is where all the roasting facilities, etc., are located. And this leads to the situation that the value addition also takes a lens in the global north, leaving only 10% of the value addition in the country of origin, so the growing country, the coffee growing countries, and 90% in the consuming countries. And when you look at profit, it's even worse. Only 2% remains in the countries of origin, and 98% lands in the consuming countries. So this is not a sustainable situation. We want to restore this balance. It's out of balance now, and we want to get to a 50-50 split. 50% leaving in the country of origin, 50% in the consuming countries. This is where we introduced our farming principles. So we have looked at the supply chain of coffee, and a big part of the value addition in coffee takes place at processing, so the roasting and packing of the coffee. It's now all being done in the global north. So what we did, we built our own roasting facility in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. I don't know how I can get back. Okay, yeah. So we are now roasting and packing in Addis, and by doing that, we have not only created jobs over there, and we can pay them a decent salary, we can give them access to healthcare, etc. But it also means for a country like Ethiopia that the export value of a product is tripling. So instead of exporting green beans and processed beans, we are now exporting a processed consumer-ready product which has 3 times the value, so 3 times as many dollars, etc., are coming in. Just a small comparison, for example, with the grapes in France. France is not exporting grapes, no, they are exporting wine. And of course it makes a huge difference in terms of value. When you look at Ethiopia, at this moment, the annual export, it's 800 million in green beans of coffee, and they're getting over 3 billion in development aid. So if you triple the export value by processing the coffee in Ethiopia, it will make Ethiopia a lot more self-reliant and less independent. So we call this a fair chain. We want to have a chain in coffee where every stakeholder gets a fair share of the value build-up. So value add at source, that's one of the principles. We want to compete on quality, so we are paying for the quality of the coffee. We do not want to buy the coffee as cheap as possible, meaning we will create poverty coffee. And we are looking for inclusive business models, so we want to include all stakeholders in the value chain and get a part of the value build-up. And when you go all the way back in the value chain, you come to the farmer. So we've introduced a fair chain farmer. We have trained, together with the University of Wageningen and the Jima University, a program, and we have trained 25 trainers that go to the region and train all the farmers in best practices in farming. But the farmer is still the most vulnerable, and when you look at the development of price, the price of coffee over the last 40 years, there have been some ups and downs, but the trend is still downwards, whereas we are paying in the north more and more for our coffees. So somewhere along the line, the system is not working. So we've created our theory of change. We want to change this situation, and we've looked at the farmer level as they should at least have a living income. So we determine what a living income is in our situation in Limu, in Ethiopia. They should earn 1,050 euros per year. At the moment, it's only $2 a day. So that comprises of the money that they need for food, for education, healthcare, etc. We have designed a roadmap to getting there, and when you look at this chart, the bottom line is if we don't do nothing, this is how the situation will remain. The second line above that, it's the farming practices. So the increase in yield and quality will lead to a higher income. We are paying a 20% premium on top of the market price for the quality that we are buying, so that is also helping. And on top of that, we have recently acquired a wet mill, so that the farmers no longer just sell the cherries, which is not even the bean, but they can at least sell a processed cherry, which is a bean. And we are going to hand over the wet mill in 5 years' time. We are not just giving it to them, but we will make it possible for them to earn it. Looking at the chart, this is a 10 years chart, so it takes a long time, even with all the things that we are doing, to get where we want to end. So we need to speed up, and we want to increase our ambitions. So this is how we came down to what we call the model farm. In Ethiopia, the problem is also that farmers are working on very small pieces of land, half a hectare. So with all the let's say the best practices and all the help that you can provide to farmers, it will still be very hard for them to make a living income of these small pieces of land. So we recently signed a lease contract, where we are starting with 100 hectares. We have the potential to grow to 250 hectares. Part of it is endangered forest. So if we do nothing, it will be deforested in a couple of years. So we're going to protect that, and around it we are going to plant new seedlings. So we are starting a reforestation project. In this farm, we will invite smallholder farmers to work on a 3-hectare piece of land, and we will not give it to them again, but we will make it possible for them to earn it. So that we are not in the business of acquiring land at all. We are in the business of creating impact, and so we want to make it possible for the farmers to make a profitable farm. We call it caffeinated reforestation. So now I get to blockchain. I've been telling you a lot about what our intentions are, what our impact goals are. I've told you what we are doing, and so that's storytelling and story doing. But we also want to get to story proving, and this is where blockchain is a very good technology that can give proof of verifiable impact. These are our impact moonshots. We have an economic, social, and environmental moonshot. So we, for example, we measure and we report on the jobs that we create in Ethiopia. In social, what is the percentage that we pay to employees above market conform? What is the wealth index? And environmental, we also measure our carbon footprint. And by measuring it, you can also report on it. And we're using blockchain to make our supply chain completely transparent. In the chart that I show you here is the value buildup among all the stakeholders in our supply chain. So from farmer to, let's say, the washing station, to grading, hulling, roasting, shipping, going all the way to the consumer. We show who our stakeholders are, and we also show who gets what. So we actually we make our value chain completely transparent and making consumers aware of what the value chain looks like and what we are at least trying to, how we're trying to improve. We are not there yet, but we are showing, okay, this is our roadmap, this is where we want to head, and this is where we are standing. Instead of showing the value addition on each and every step, you can also, for example, if you measure it, you can also, for each and every step, monitor and log the carbon footprint. So we start at the farmer level. We have given, we are working directly with all the farmers. We are working with smallholder farmers in forest protected areas in Limu, in the Limu region in Ethiopia. We've given all our farmers a digital identity, and we are logging all transactions. So when the farmer brings in the cherries, we log, okay, this is the amount of coffee that he's bringing, this is the price that we agreed, this is the amount that the farmer should get. We are logging the transaction of the payment. We want to pay very quickly. At this moment, we still need to do it cash. So within 2 weeks, we always pay in cash. But we are going to a system now, and we have a pilot with Unity, in fact, this summer, where we want to digitalize the payment and that transaction part of the chain as well, immediately logging it into the blockchain. By giving the farmers a digital identity, it is also for them then possible to build up a track record. At this moment, these farmers are not bankable. They don't exist for the bank. By logging all the transactions and by logging their, let's say, their capacity of earning money, the financing capacity, it also makes it possible for them to go to a bank and ask for a small loan to do investments in their farm. So blockchain is also helping making farmers bankable. So we go through all the different steps in our supply chain, recording all the transactions taking place and logging them onto the blockchain. The third, so we are using it now for, by using blockchain, we make the product that the consumer is buying completely traceable back to the region where it is coming from on a farmer level, or at least on a batch level. We can show where the coffee is coming from. We are also going to use blockchain to make digital payments and to move value among the blockchain. And to do that, we are going to introduce tokens. The token, you can look at it as a small coin that we are going to put in a bag of coffee. When you buy a bag of coffee in the supermarket and you scan the QR code which is on it, you will get a 50-cent value in your digital wallet. And you as a consumer then have the choice to keep it. And when you keep it, you can use it as a discount on your next bag of coffee. But we also are asking you, share it. And then you can donate it to one of our projects. And a project, for example, could be a healthcare project. It could be a training. But we are also, what we are trying to do is also do it in a business way. So it's, for example, the token can be lent to a farmer, and it will allow him, for example, to buy seedlings. And with the seedlings, he will have additional income over years. And with the additional income, he can pay back this microloan as it is then. We are if the consumer decides to keep the token, apparently he likes our coffee, which is good. The more coffee he buys, the more coffee we are going to buy from the farmers, so the more impact we generate, which is good. But then we will ask him, okay, this is our mode of advertising. So please share the message with your friends, with your family, and this is what we call a crowd speak. And instead of spending our marketing money on big campaigns or paying a famous actor or whatever, we ask the consumer, okay, we put our money, instead of spending it there, we put it in the bank, we create tokens against it, and we give the consumer the option for being involved in our value chain and moving impact or moving value back into the value chain, which will directly benefit our stakeholders in the supply chain, in fact the smallholder farmers. Yes, so I will wrap it up. So why are we using blockchain? It's a promise of trust, of course. It's unalterable. We create traceability. We create full transparency. You can choose your impact KPI instead of value addition. You can choose carbon footprint. We are going to introduce tokenization. We have just started a project with cacao coming from Ecuador, which we will introduce in the UK market. So we want to make our blockchain not only available for coffee, but for any crop and any supply chain, in fact, with additions of with changes, of course, to make it possible. But we want to make it available at a low cost in order to also to scale up all the possibilities and benefit many other supply chains. If you have questions, please, I'm willing to take them, or maybe later on at lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Govers, Sander Govers, for this exposition on the practical experience of dealing with the coffee industry in Ethiopia. This morning we heard how in Uganda the concept of blockchain technology was being embraced broadly. Now we were able to focus, and we thank you for the very clear and practical examples of the steps that you have taken towards this objective, where you intend to go, and also to have included the concept of corporate social responsibility, which we see being embedded in that. So thank you. So thought-provoking, as were all the other presentations. And now we move to our fourth panelist, Annette Houtkamer. I just failed on that exam. Annette has a lifetime experience in finance, insurance, reinsurance, and development, spanning India, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, Senegal, and South Africa. She's experienced in inclusive insurance and integrated risk management, building local capacity and mutual networks and institutions responsive to underserved markets. She is skilled in social insurance, and economy, and holds an MBA. And Annette is going to now share with us the experience that we think we need to hear from you on this subject matter. Annette, you have the floor. Looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to add insurance to the whole scene that we are discussing at the moment. Insurance protection, as Theo already mentioned. Farmers wake up in the morning and the first thing that they think about is about risks. And one of those risks is weather risk, drought, too much rain, whatever sort of climate-related risk there may be. And for that, crop micro insurance is hardly available. It doesn't scale well down to the local level of farmers, and as a result, 500 million smallholder farmers are left without any financial protection against those hardships thrown at them by an act of God. The solution we think is IBISA, and IBISA stands for Inclusive Blockchain Insurance Using Space Assets. And I will come to all those components one by one. IBISA is a mutualized solution. It's based on peer-to-peer risk sharing, as I said, supported by blockchain and Earth observation technologies. And because it is peer-to-peer, we are not a centralized insurance company. So we don't have a heavy overhead, and we don't have the traditional insurance paradigms. At the moment, we work with 16 strategic partnerships worldwide. Why worldwide? Because a peer-to-peer risk-sharing mechanism only works if you are able to diversify risks across the globe. If it's dry in Africa, most probably it will not be dry at the same point in time in Asia or in the Caribbean. So in that way, we diversify risks across the globe. Currently, already 2,600 farmers are enrolled in our pilot in India and Niger, and we are starting to deploy by the end of this year in Bangladesh, Kenya, and or Guatemala, and that and or depends on the money available for the introduction to those local enablers. The enablers you may see at the bottom of your screen are Daan Foundation, Réseau Bilital Maroubé in Niger, BRAC in Bangladesh, one of the biggest microfinance institutes in the world, Tula in Kenya, that is a value chain provider helping farmers with their inputs like seeds and fertilizers. Micro is a Latin American-based reinsurance entity working for the bottom of the pyramid insurances against natural catastrophes in that area. As I said, the market size is 500 million small farmers. Suppose that those small farmers pay 16 euro per year for protection against hardships. That would be 8,000 million euros in terms of premium. Suppose that we have 10% customers with a, 10 million customers, that makes it 2% market share, only 2%. That will lead to a turnover of 160 million euro. That is how big the market at the bottom of the pyramid is, even if you are insuring smallholder farmers only able to pay $16 per year. The product is, I must say, an affordable protection. It's value to money. The 16 euro will go to the risk management, the risk sharing, the risk protection of the farmers, not to overhead. It is transparent. It will cover excess rain or drought, and it's modeled according to the demands of the farmers that we interviewed. It is mobile and instant. The premium payments will be done in small installments from the beginning of the season, so that if a farmer incurs a loss at the beginning of the season because the rains are not coming, he or she may be able, from that small installment of money, to buy new seeds and go for a second sowing, so that they, when the rains come, they may still have some yields. There's no need to send claim forms or do some sort of online claims transaction with us, because we will automatically pay out because of the constant influx of Earth observation data. So we will notice that there is a claim, and farmers don't need to alert us. They are onboarded with the help of local partners, as I said, BRAC, Daan, Tula, RBM, Micro, and they help them on board on IBISA, because most probably local farmers will not have access to internet. The farmer's plot is added into the system and the coverage is described, either excess rain or drought. Then the payments start. They can be frequent, monthly, weekly, but also quarterly or annually. We don't care how you pay as long as the payments are made. That flexibility will give the farmer the time to manage other risks and financial means in the farm. So at the beginning of the season, you will have protection even if you only paid 80%, because we introduce a merit. And if you have only paid 80% of your premium, your proportional cover will be a little less, but you still will receive a payment if you have a loss. As I said, every month we will assess losses via the satellite. Currently we will use NDVI and NDWI. W stands for water, the other one stands for vegetational index. And based on that, we will see what the situation in the fields are. No need for people to go there, so that's why it's not costly. And we will pay proportionally, as I said. We already introduced the product in India with an organization spread over 14 states. So also in India, we have a logical diversification of risks that is necessary, because at this point in time, it is not allowed by the Indian authorities to get money out of the country to pay other farmers. So the risk sharing that we are creating by means of IBISA is not allowed to do globally. So we have to find a diversification and decorrelation in the country itself. The other one is in Niger, where we work with Draxis, and one of the people from Draxis is here to answer your questions if you want to know more about the Earth observation technology. The technologies we use are blockchain, Earth observation, and parametric insurance, and read all about it in your handout. Our roadmap, we started in 2018 with seed money from the European Space Agency, the 1st of February 2018. This is where we are now. So we came this far in a year. And we want to have at least 4 million people onboarded in 2022. We have some challenges. Each and every country has its own legal, regulatory challenges, as we discussed this morning. We need to discuss country-wise with the local authorities whether they see us as insurance or whether they see us as a social benefit scheme, or whether they allow the money to go out of the country for the global risk sharing or not. It takes up a lot of time. Having said that, there is an international regulatory body, the IAIS, based in Geneva, and it helps immensely that we have good connections over there and that we can talk with them directly, and they are the advisors to all the regulatory and supervisor entities in 200 jurisdictions. So we convinced them, meanwhile, about the usability of IBISA, the fact that it is a mutual risk-sharing mechanism, and that it is to the benefit of the farmers, and that we are trustworthy, and that we do all the things that traditional insurers do to guide and protect the interests of the insured farmers, such as Solvency II regulations, etc. We are also constantly in connection with the Commissariat aux Assurances in Luxembourg, where we are based. We have some press awards. Have a look at it when you have some time. We received some other awards, the Financial Inclusion Awards in 2018. We were selected by the Springboard Business of Blockchain Lab in New York, and at the moment we are in San Francisco because we were selected as by the Blockchain Accelerator program from Consensus, owner of the Ethereum platform, and we are there now, and as part of the deal for being part of this program. Consensus invested $100,000 as our first shareholder in Ibiza. So we are pretty happy with that. Thanks, and have a look at our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for this, Annette. You took us into another era. I have to thank CTA for having thought of including this important aspect of insurance. And as you spoke, I thought of how you were able to anticipate the issues that the farmers would be facing. You're able to facilitate in response and also to have made an impact. And we want to thank you for that. I hope and I believe that all of us found this as enlightening as I did. And we thank you so much for your presentation. This then allows us to move to our final speaker on this panel, after which we will hopefully have the time for a few questions. Eric, I just failed a test. I think I'm about to fail another one, but I will try. Eric Arroxalasi is the CEO of TE Food International, GmbH, Albstadt, Germany, since 2018. A Hungarian national, he has led a range of IT and traceability projects in Europe and beyond. His background is in civil engineering, and he speaks English, German, Italian, and Hungarian. We'll only be using English today. TE Food is a farm-to-table fresh food traceability ecosystem on blockchain, covering all logistics and food quality activities and data management of the supply chain. It provides cost-effective software and identification tools to make livestock and fresh food supply information transparent. Your biodata contains all the keywords for blockchain, transparent among them. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation for this briefing today. So about T-Food, T-Food, it's a food traceability system. We have representatives in 16 countries already, and we have implementations in Asia and Australia, United States, Canada, and Europe. We are working with Ocean together in 5 countries in Europe and 1 country from Africa, from Senegal. This is the Ocean retail solution that we are doing for them. Today, I don't want to talk as much about the food traceability, but it's a very connected topic that I would like to mention, and this is the animal epidemic issue and how to help, how to use the blockchain technology in this issue. This is my topic for today. Some years ago, 2 years ago, it was an outbreak. It's a continuous fight against the African swine flu or fever all over the world. Last year, middle of last year in summer in China, it was a big outbreak, and that outbreak it's already spread out not only in Southeast Asian countries, but it's already in Europe. 2-3 weeks ago, the South African Republic of South Africa reported already some cases, and experts are telling that this year it will has impact in the American continent as well. So we can tell that epidemic today, the African swine flu epidemic, it's a global issue. According to the reports today, so only in Vietnam in the last 3-4 months, it was killed 1.2 million pigs because of the swine flu. The whole population in Vietnam is 35 million pigs, and this is only in 3 months. So it's a big impact, and we think there is a lot of issues to be solved in the epidemic, animal epidemic topic overall. The first thing, the most affected sector an animal epidemic, it's the household farming or the small farming. The big industrial farms can protect themselves. They have good education. They have relatively good biosecurity. But the small farming, the household farming, has lack of knowledge. Even the authorities, they don't know how many farms they have locally. In the emerging countries, it's a big issue about the livestock. The authorities, they don't have clear picture. And even the missing education in the household farming or the small farming, it's a big issue in the epidemic, and which is very important, which is connected to the livestock information. When an epidemic outbreak is coming, then it's very, very important for the authorities to plan the interventions and the actions to have a real-time online knowledge about the status of the epidemic, and for that it's very important to involve and include the household and small farming informations as well. What we experienced in terms of the animal epidemic in some countries where we have already some use cases, the missing interoperability, that means missing interoperability between the authorities, the local authorities, because a lot of authorities, local departments are involved or impacted, affected by the epidemic, agriculture, health, trade, logistic even. So the veterinary authority, and they should have a very good cooperation, and that cooperation should be based on very good, let's say, data knowledge. The actual status should be known for every stakeholder, and they should work very, very good together, and they should work together with the industry itself, with the agriculture industry. And this is not only a domestic issue, because the virus doesn't see the borders. It's a cross-border issue, so the countries should work together, and even it should have somehow a global solution, at least a global suggestion how to solve that issue when the outbreak is coming. Again, the biosecurity knowledge is very, very low level on the household farming, so it's a very important part how to pass over that knowledge, what to do, how to make the cooling itself, how to recognize the symptoms, what to do, and which is additionally very important. When an outbreak is coming, for instance, in China or even Vietnam now, they are making the cooling. And after there is the farm, no pigs, let's say in case of the African swine flu, no pigs anymore. And the question is what they do after the killing the animal, how they survive, which sector they are going to look, chicken sector or any other agriculture sector, to be able to survive the household family, the relatives. And it's, again, a very, very important global issue, global question, because we heard already that because last year it was the China outbreak, and a lot of household farming went over to the chicken sector, and already the bird flu is there. It's a question when it's coming to the Southeast Asia, and when it will be again a global issue, the bird flu. So the biodiversity, that means teaching the household farming which sector to choose after the epidemic outbreak. It's a very, very important part as well. And even the missing protocols, global missing protocols, how to communicate, how to make the interoperability between the authorities, global authorities, the countries. So it's a very big issue as well. And what we experienced, not in Europe, but in the emerging countries, the compensation rules. There are rules, there are some legislations, but they are not really transparent. Nobody knows how and when they will get the money, the compensation, because they killed the animal. And the compensation rules has the missing transparency, the missing, let's say, payment tracking potential, and even the potential. If the local economy has the potential to pay the compensation, even. So a lot of issues to be solved. And when we see how to jump to the next. Yes. So who are the stakeholders? When we are talking about blockchain technology and when we are talking about decentralization, it's very, very important to define the stakeholder structure because when we are talking about decentralization, we are decentralizing the information, the knowledge, the way of cooperation within the stakeholder structure. So that's why it's very important to identify in the animal epidemic case as well the stakeholders, who are the most important stakeholders. The first one is, no question, the authorities. The authorities has to take care about the compensation. They have to know what to do. They have to plan the interventions, the actions. They have to follow the rules. They have to create the rules in case of the epidemic. They have to solve the food supply if there is a shortage. We had a talk with World Bank 2-3 weeks ago in Ukraine. It's a huge issue, the African swine flu as well. And there is a scenario when no food, because the pig is a strategical food in Ukraine as well, and how to solve the period when no chicken yet, but still the pigs are killed already. So the authorities has a lot of things to do, and the authorities should cooperate, should work together. They should share the information, the veterinary, the police, the army, even in a serious epidemic outbreak, and even all the other authorities, health authority, trade authority. So that stakeholder is not only one stakeholder, it's a lot of different type of authorities. The next one is the industry itself, the agriculture sector, the farms. Not only the small farms, but the big farms are stakeholders in that decentralized structure, let's say. They should know everything. They should be informed. They should register and report what they are doing. If they let's say, realize there is symptoms, they should, as fast as possible, inform the decentralized system. And even they should know exactly the compensation rules transparently, and they should have the possibility to track the compensations, the payments, the subsidies. Because this is one of the most important motivations for the farmers to be a part of this decentralized structure. If they feel that let's say, the social environment, the country, or even the non-profit organizations are taking care of them, then they will cooperate. They will be motivated to work in this issue. And the third and very important stakeholder is the supply chain, the food supply chain itself, and at the end of the supply chain, the consumer community itself. A lot of questions everywhere because of for instance, in that case of the African swine flu, but when the bird flu is coming, more questions, food safety questions, even economical impacts. The meat will be much more expensive, and even can they buy the meat or not? Can they eat pig or not, or pork or chicken later if something happens? So the stakeholders structure, we can tell it's a global stakeholder structure. What we have developed, it's a very, very connected module to the traceability module, because the traceability, it's a very important part to control the epidemic issue. When we are talking about movements, livestock movements, the traceability is let's say, the first module or function, feature, because we can track where the livestock went, from where and to where is going. But beside that, the livestock and the epidemic module that we have implemented and developed has a farm registration module, a mobile-based farm registration module. It's very important that our solution, it's a mobile-based solution. The mobile client software is directly connected to the blockchain, and the farmers are able to register themselves. They are able to give daily more times reports about the livestock and even the death cases. They are able to choose the symptoms and there is a veterinary authority module connected as well. So the data collection, it's a very important part. Collect data real time from the farm side, from the authority side in the decentralized blockchain structure. And beside that, which is very important, the education, biosecurity, as I mentioned before, the what to do after the epidemic education, following the biodiversity rules, global biodiversity rules, the communication between the authorities, communication towards the agriculture sector and even the consumer side as well. Report statistics, and what we are working on, it's an AI, let's say, prediction or trend analysis tool, where we can predict with the AI the direction, the speed, and even the economical impact of the actual epidemic, and the compensation module. And why we need blockchain for this? Because it's unmodifiable. So all the buzzwords that we know about the blockchain, it's connected to this issue, unmodifiable in terms of the data, the transactions, the events, even the rules, intervention rules and protocols. It's transparent, again, data, and even in smart contract represented protocols and interventions, and decentralized, of course. We have the food chain. The food chain is the main part of our blockchain. This is the blockchain part that we have developed. That system for the livestock and epidemic system, it's used now in Vietnam. We signed a contract 3 days ago in Laos to implement that system for the Laos solution, and we already sent through our local implementation partner that possibility to the South African government to help there, and even we are in negotiations with the World Bank how to implement that solution in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and even other African and Latin American countries as well. One last sentence. The technology is not the final solution, it's a part of it. That epidemic issue it requires high-level cooperation, no question, but other side, motivation, education, regulatory side, so the government should, local and the global cooperated government should work together to make the public communication and even the sample testing and so on. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Eric, thank you so very much, and I'm really quite grateful to the organizers that once again you have tapped into another aspect of the treatment of this issue, that of dealing with epidemics in the agricultural industry. Thank you for your exposition, Eric. Again, you have pointed out the importance of certain activities that need to take place in those situations. You have drawn attention to the stakeholders, you have drawn attention to the benefit of different kinds of intervention and how blockchain technology has been used, and as you have acknowledged, as other speakers before you have done, that it is only but part of the solution and not the entirety of it. I think we have had another rich exchange provided by all our panelists, and I want to thank all of them for this, really appreciated it. I have learned so much today, and I believe many of you have. And as you have been contemplating some of the information provided, I think one or two of you may have a question or so, or a comment that you would like to pose. We are in fact running behind time, but I think I'd like to afford the opportunity to 2 questions. If at all possible, we'll take them together and then have the responses, and I would just encourage you to make them brief. I see the Ambassador of Kenya. Excellency, you have the floor, and I see Mr. Mooney, so we will take those 2 questions. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wonderful presentations. Allow me just to make 2 comments and ask 1 question. With regard to the presentation by Diondo, indeed mentioned that titles as collaterals exist basically in Southern Africa. I want him to know that they are in other parts of Africa. For example, between 2013, Madam Chair, and 2017, Kenya processed over 3.3 million title deeds. I wanted that to be known. Secondly, I like the presentation by Sanda, where he talked about 50% stroke 50% profit sharing, which is brilliant. As ACP countries, we've been talking about exporting processed goods from our countries. So this concept of earned value at source, brilliant. He is a friend of ACP, if I can say that. Finally, Madam Chair, if you ask, I want to ask just a small question to Annette, my friend. She talked about challenges with regard to this product of theirs, Ibiza. And the only challenge that she mentioned is legal. I want to imagine more above legal challenges, there must be something else with regard to this product. It's one thing to sell a product in a very nice way, the way Annette did, but let her tell us about these other challenges. Thank you. I submit.
Thank you, Excellency. I now give the floor to Mr. Mooney. You have the floor.
Well, thank you. I very much enjoyed the presentations, and I'll just ask Annette a quick question, which is there a concern that there could be a bias in the insurance that because of the stresses that you're focusing on would affect different crops in different ways? So is there a bias towards then insuring only certain crops in certain places and excluding others? And within those crops, would there be a bias towards certain genetic diversity than others? So that farmers might find themselves being encouraged to grow specific crops or even taking on input packages that would reduce their insurance costs.
Annette, the focus is on you. 2 questions. Thank you. Okay, we'll take one other quick question and then we'll do the answers. So could you hold for me, Annette? Alice, you have the floor.
It's actually not a question, but it's a comment and a response to the inquiry you said about the legal challenges you have in this jurisdiction. There's a slide that I missed in my presentation about, I told you we don't have specific laws in blockchain in most East African countries or African countries, but many also African countries now have implemented or enforced the data protection and privacy law, and that law definitely actually has an impact on all the nature of doing business in blockchain, because it's all about collecting data. The data subjects, do you get consent from them in case you're in breach? What are the sanctions? We copied a lot in our country, in Uganda. We benchmarked a lot with the GDPR. So some of the regulations, since you're based actually in Europe, you'll be compliant, I think, automatically if you came to East Africa, because I know many of the regulations are quite similar. But in terms of being on the right side of the law and the wrong side of the law, some of the existing laws, you could be able to actually know where you fall. Yeah.
Thank you for helping Alice out. Alice, I turn to you, and sorry, Annette, and I turn to you, and then we will close off the panel. You have the floor.
Okay. Mr. Komani, let me start with your question. You asked me, are there any other challenges than the legal, regulatory, supervisory challenges? Yes, of course there are. We have to build a parametric model, and we have to acquire data, weather risk data from all those specific countries that we are going to work in. So we need historic data. Satellite data is usually not older than 5 to 10 years. In traditional insurance, you usually go back 40 years to be sure that you have a proper validated model. So we are creating some guesstimates. Having said that, answering to Pat Mooney and your question at the same time, we are completely agnostic to what type of crops there are in the soil. So we don't care what crops they are growing. And we can do that because we don't insure typical parts of the land and specific crops, because we want to allow people to come with intercropping. All the small farmers need to be part of our solution. So whatever there is on the soil, we are happy to protect it. And we only look at the situation of this year compared to the last year and the year before that, based on the NDVI, the vegetation, normalized digital vegetation index, or the NWI, the normal digital water index. So is there more or less water than last year? Is there more or less vegetation in the fields than last year? And if we conclude that there is less, then there is a loss and people will receive their money. So it doesn't matter what the type of crop is, as long as they tell us what the amount of money is that they will pay us compared to the amount of money that they want to have protected. And then the premium will be somewhere between 2 and 5%, not more, never more. 5% being already on the high, taking into account that there may be somewhat more risks than in other parts of the world.
Thank you very much for that. I think that it now behoves me to pass the floor to Dr. Michael Hailu, the director of CTA, who will help to bring these proceedings to a closing, and I will hand over to him. And in doing so, thank all of you for your kind attention and your participation, and it was a pleasure to be here. Dr. Hailu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your excellent chairmanship of this session. Well, this morning we really had very insightful presentations and different perspectives, and not only just on the technology of blockchain as such, but also on some of the challenges that we face in making value chains more transparent and efficient. I think what we have learned is that the first thing really to look at is what do we really want to achieve. And once we decide what we want to achieve, whether it's from a business perspective or from a policy perspective, then there are a whole range of technologies that one can use, not necessarily not only blockchain but others. But blockchain offers a lot of advantages, as we have seen from the various presentations. So I think the key thing that, of course, we had a number of keywords in terms of establishing trust across the value chain and creating more efficiencies, the need for partnership, and of course the need to bring different technologies together. So it's not really just blockchain, but around that, you have a lot of other technologies that will contribute to making blockchain effective and efficient. Also, one key message that I captured is that a bad smart contract is still a bad contract. So it's not because it's on a blockchain that's something that's not good for the farmer, for the smallholder, can necessarily become good because we have a new technology that's being used. So really the reliability, credibility of the original information is still critical. That applies to any IT system that one would introduce. So again, it has been a very rich discussion, so I wouldn't even attempt to summarize or highlight, but I think it's also important what Pat Mooney said in terms of making sure that whatever technology we apply is really inclusive and really takes the interest of the smallholder farmers, the disadvantaged communities that we really want to serve, that these technologies make it easier for us to serve their interests. So I had really excellent examples, from the coffee in Ethiopia and also the insurance and so on. So really, I think for us the issue is how do we take advantage of these emerging technologies to create transparency, inclusiveness, and opportunities for smallholder producers for young people and for women as well, who are really disadvantaged in this across the value chain. So I think that that's a key lesson, and from our perspective, of course, we very much appreciate to hear more from you in terms of specific use cases, especially that bring together partnerships between big companies and small enterprises, so that we can link across the value chain, both within a regional and international market. So any lessons that you might have to share with us, we would like to develop our database and be able to share with our partners. We'll continue to encourage innovative applications coming from, especially from startups in ACP countries. Of course, we have this excellent example from IBM, which is fairly large scale, but we'd also like to encourage small scale applications, startups, the examples from Uganda and so on. So that's a message that we'll also like to share. So thank you very much. I can also announce that our next briefing will be on 3rd of July. It will be on the water, energy, and land nexus, a fairly different topic from what we have today. So I want to encourage you also to join us at the briefing on 3rd of July. So before I conclude, I'd like to thank very much our speakers for taking their time, for making these excellent presentations, for our two chairs of the sessions before the first session, Ambassador Mbwendi, I think he's still with us. Thank you very much. We really appreciate. We have, of course, a couple of ambassadors. It's quite unusual to have a number of ambassadors join us and go through the whole session. So it shows how much interest there is on this topic. And of course, our chair of this session, Her Excellency Sheila Montes from Jamaica. So thank you very much. And again, I also like to thank my colleagues, Isolina and the team, for organizing this briefing, always very well organized with excellent attendance. It really is a lot of work for our team, so I appreciate they have to work late at night and so on, last minute to make all these things come together. So again, thank you very much, and I invite you to join us for our networking lunch.